Okay, how about now? Aha, there we go. There we go. Ah, finally. Right, sorry for the delay. If anyone's here yet. That was my stream key had apparently changed. I hope that doesn't mean someone's hacked it and has changed it without my permission. Okay, so theoretically we should be on private, and this should be viewable only to patrons and a couple of other select people that I've picked. Let me just check my sound's working. Okay, so theoretically, yes, my sound does appear to be working. Okay, that's good. Okay, so now Patreon folk, I'm just posting the link. Whoa! Not that link. That's my stream key. Let me find... That would be silly to paste one's stream key because other people can stream. It's not that silly, to be honest. Okay. So I'll paste that here. Patreon folk. I posted the wrong link there as well. I'm doing very badly, but soon... Okay, I will explain in just a moment. Thanks there, Meg. Actual stream link. I nearly typed stink. I'm an idiot, but... Come to the thing, please. Doing. Oh no, that's wrong too! Oh, everything's very wrong. Hang on. So what's happening here is I'm trying to post the link to the video on Patreon and the link to the Patreon post everywhere else. And it's very difficult for some reason to get those things the right way around. Okay, there's that. And then here, Patreon folk. Here is the actual link. LOL. Oh god, it's the wrong channel. Actually come to the actual stream. I have screwed up in every permutation possible, but here it is. Link. Ha ha! There. And now Meg is getting a video is unavailable. Okay, let's find out why that would be. Okay, try now. Oh my god. Oh, okay. Okay, there we go. Now I think I've actually managed to paste the link in the correct places. Right? Now I think I have. Let me just check myself. Right. Yes, that's working for me. I've got a couple of people here now. I'm not going to put the chat up on the screen this time because this video is going to remain open. And basically, what am I talking about? Of course I am. Hang on. There you go. There's the chat. I don't know why I thought I wasn't going to post it. I think I had an idea at one time that it was a sensible idea not to post it, but that was wrong. Here it is. So you guys can now say anything you want. You can make the most terrible criticism. Oh, well, I don't mean terrible. I mean, like, scathing criticism of what I'm about to read you. Nice cup of tea there. Okay, so what we're doing is I am reading you the opening of this flipping book I've been writing. Could you guys tell me who've actually managed to get here? If it's all working now, have I put the link in the Patreon post correctly? Have I put that Patreon post in the chat correctly? And not just in the flipping Seriosity Zone, just because I happened to have that tab open earlier. God, I hate the fact that there are tabs. It's so difficult. Okay. The last thing I need to do is to post the link to the Patreon post, not to the video, on Twitter. So I'm just going to do that. Here we go. Patreon people, I am reading the start of my book to you. All tears, everyone welcome. Come and tell me how bad it is, and more importantly, how it is bad. Link to the Patreon post, not to the video. Okay. Okay. Right. Right. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay, I'm going to cough now. There we go. Clearing my throat there, and I have remembered, as far as I'm aware, to turn the microphone back on. Aren't I clever? So hello everybody. So what we're doing here, what this is that... Come on, that would be quite a good book, Pog. Right. So I'm going to read you my thing. As you may know, I've been writing this thing for quite a while now and not really telling you very much about it. Some of you were here at the very inception of the very beginning of it, and helped me to start it off. This is probably the first you've seen of it since. It is a sort of silly fantasy novel, but also another thing, a couple of other things. Well, you'll find out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it to you. Just the first sort of, chunk, and I don't know how much of it I'll get through. I've got a place where I want to get to. Basically, I'd like to get to the point where we sort of solve the little mystery that happens in the first few scenes. Don't know if there'll be time for that. If not, we'll have to do another one of these. And the plan is to do more of these. But because I'm now 58 flipping thousand words into this book, I never thought that would happen. I have been beating about the bush for a very long time, as in like my whole adult life. I've had a novel on the go that I thought was really cool, and I still think it was, but I've had to put it on hold because I realised I just wasn't doing any writing. I was just doing loads of planning, which is a terrible, desperate hole that people fall into when they're first trying to write a book. And so I threw that all out of the window, and I started writing a completely new thing. And this is that new thing. It's not really new anymore because I've been at it for months and months and months. I go off to a little cafe that I like, and I write, not every day, but as many days as I can. For a while, it was every day. I really bullied myself into doing it every single day, and I got the first, 50,000 written during that period, or no, more like 40, 45. Well worth doing if you can possibly do it. A couple of hours every day. I've ended up with quite a nasty little cough in my throat today. I'll try and mute the microphone whenever I'm going to do that. I'll do it again now. There we go. Oh, so there was quite a lot of activity in the chat. Hello, everyone. Hello, Meg. Hello, Edgo. I've never seen you call yourself Edgo before. Hello. Well, hello, everyone. No, I will say hello to everyone. Hello, Jacques. Hello, Pogo. Hello, Miriam. Oh, hello, Miriam. Not seen you around in a while. And, no, I'm not going to be reading you Ready Player One. Don't worry about that. I'm going to read you my story. So are you ready? So this is what you should imagine now is some kind of ethereal music. Maybe if you've got the soundtrack to The Witcher 3 lying around, or any of the Witcher games lying around, you should just put on a track, not one of the fighty tracks, one of the ethereal tracks. Yeah, open a YouTube tab up. A YouTube tab. Open up a YouTube tab of your favourite ethereal fantasy music for this first section, because it's going to be a little bit ghostly. I promised you a ghost. Oh, important to note, this is a first draft. And if you don't know about writing books, the first draft, who knows if this is going to be anything resembling what's in the final book. I think that my style of writing is a bit more like that I write it quite carefully and kind of edit it as I read it back as I go along. So maybe it's somewhere close to what the final version will be like, rather than, I don't do that thing, which I wish I could do, where you almost close your eyes and hammer out your first draft and it's all there and then that's out of the way and that's the plaster pulled and then you can redraft the whole thing. I'd like to do that, I just can't because I'm too obsessive. So maybe I'll learn that with time. But yeah, so I can't really speak to the quality of this, but you can. So you tell me if you think this is any good, and I mean that. Do not pull your punches. You are my oracles. I don't mean that. What do I mean? Well, my sort of Greek chorus who need to lean in and shout at me, and he did that badly. Anything you think should be changed or improved, you are going to be the ones who help me with that, if you would like. So first draft, and friends. There you go. That's the word. And if you want to be friends, then a good way of doing that is by telling me what I've done wrong here. But to be honest, I'm fairly pleased with this first section, and I'll even read you out if I've left myself any notes about what I think I should change already. And you'll see. Now, I'm just going to disappear my face off the screen for a moment, because... Will that work? No, of course that won't work. That's silly. I'm just going to disappear my face like that. If I put it back, will it work? There it is. Because I'm going to blow my nose. So let the fact that the chat remains on screen be... No, I know. I'll put on, like, the Go to the Toilet song. That tends to help, doesn't it? I'm just going to blow my nose, you know? So that's not something you want to watch me do. So let me find where I've put the Go to the Toilet... Oh, where have I put the Go to the Toilet song? Where have I put it? Oh, I can't find it. So instead you're going to have to listen to some Slightly Magic. In a moment, there will now be some Slightly Magic music for you while I blow my nose. Here it comes. Can you hear it? Is that coming through in your feed? Yeah? Hey. Oh, I found it. There it is. I'm not going to the toilet, but so I'll just leave this on for a moment. See you in a moment after I've blown my nose. That's from Slightly Magic there, a game that I'm going to be going back to soon. That was the Amiga version and Steam version, which has been kindly provided for us, I believe, by Pogo of this parish over here. But I've been having trouble getting it to film. Obs can't see it, so I shall have to do the full monitor capture, which is it's not ideal. But anyway, actually, yeah, that would be good music to start this off with. So here we go. Draft 1, opening scene, book I'm writing, spooky music. Shapes moved in the smoke. The outline of a shoulder, the hollow impression of a face. That's enough of that. Shapes moved in the smoke. The outline of a shoulder, the hollow impression of a face. Straw grunted and adjusted a couple of the candles in the inner ring, keeping her eyes fixed on the smoke to appraise the result. The apparition was certainly clearer now. She could even make out places where the material of its jacket was frayed as it moved in the faint violet glow. "Speak," she instructed. It opened its mouth and said something, but the voice was a distant echo. She tutted. Not yet. Stay put. You won't be able to get past the candles. She shuffled backwards to fuss with the positioning of the outer ring, which looked all wrong now that she'd fixed the inner one. She picked up one of the fatter, blacker candles and turned it over, examining the runes chipped into the side. With a fingernail, she straightened off one of the edges before putting the candle back in place. I didn't need to be kneeling on stone floors today, she said, throwing a few more green opal granules into the ring. Reflected light flashed as the granules began to shiver and roll with the rest, shining gentle circles on the surface of the smoke, which then remained captured there, riding further upwards in twirling eddies. How's that? Any better? No, don't try wiggling out. I need to talk to you, and I've got a warrant. Don't test me today. I've had a whole morning of people playing cheeky buggers with me. Trouble is, people think police work gets done by magic. They reckon we just wave a magic wand and the case gets solved. She twisted a couple of the candles so the runes lined up. The flameless supernatural light burning at their tips crackled, and the ghost came into clearer focus. Much better. It's a myth, though. Clean-up are often supplied with a few low-level ones from the locker, because I don't know if you've ever tried getting blood stains out of wooden flooring. It isn't fun. But no, the bulk of detective work happens up here. And note that I've just tapped my head and not anybody else's, because it's my head, in particular, that ends up having to do most of it. Right, let's have a look at you. The spirit looked to be on the later end of his 40s, with a well-trimmed beard and powerful arms. She suppressed a laugh. The deceased had actually been 55 when he died, and hadn't ever quite mastered a razor from what she'd seen, but you couldn't blame someone for the way they saw themselves. Speak, she said again. I'm just saying, said the ghost, audibly this time, I don't know what help you think I can be. You're going to tell me everything you know about the transportation of a quite significant number of coins from the home of a Mr. Nigel Fairhill via cart about a month ago. You'll be telling me why we discovered that cart in a ditch down the side of Winder's Patch, and you do know something because your corpse was recovered from that same ditch. If you decide not to talk, I'm going to have to find a way to put you under arrest for obstructing the course of justice, even if it means digging a binding gem out of storage. Clear? The ghost shrugged. Absolutely. It was the Shrikes. Oh, said Straw. Right, good. Good start. Well, the idea was that I'd show up with my cart at a certain time, park it next to a certain small window, and have a good amount of cloth at the ready. They told me that I should stretch it out to cover the window and the cart, making it look like I was just getting ready to fold it neatly, at which point goods would be thrown from the window into the wagon under the cover of the cloth. I'd fold the cloth over the wagon as if satisfied it was properly arranged, in the process causing the goods to be packed in and hidden. And then I'd take off in the direction of Winder's, asking no question about the nature of the goods, even if I could see perfectly well with my own eyes what they were, and that they weren't the sort of thing I should be transporting. I would then be met at the Broxbury end by another bloke with another cart, we'd swap, and I'd be on the way with my pay. And a slightly better cart. They told you that, did they? They did. And do you often listen to what criminals tell you? No, first time. You should understand, detective. I have a son who'll want sending off to be educated before long, and a barrowman's wage isn't going to reach to that any time soon. I must have moaned too loudly too often, because somehow my name got as far as the Shrikes, and they offered... Yes, all right, Straw interrupted. I couldn't possibly care about that. What I want is names. Who employed you, who was going to pay you, and who attacked you on Winder's Patch? Nobody attacked me, the ghost laughed. It was my own stupid fault I ended up in that ditch. Must have been panicking more than I thought. Went over a rock. As for names, you must have dealt with the Shrikes before. They don't give out their names. No, not as a rule, but you have to hope, don't you? Are you sure none of them mention a name at all? Sorry. Can I ask, what am I doing here exactly? Answering questions. No, I mean, here. I gather I died. Under my cart, apparently. So what's this? A séance? Something like, and not one that'll last very long, so I have to press you. Is there anything you can tell me? With the Shrikes, we need as many leads as we can get. As soon as you think you got a handle on them, they disappear again. The ghost stuck out his lip as he thought. Well, like I said, they've got a man in Broxbury with a cart. Or they did have. Shouldn't think he'll still be there. How long have they been out? A month. Oof. How's Helen? She doing all right? I don't know. Stick to the subject, please. Oh, that's it. I was meeting someone. For all I know, he was some other underpaid wretch like myself. I'd had instructions. That's it. Not trying to keep anything from you. That's honestly all I've got. I wish I knew more. I'd be perfectly willing to spill the beans. Shrikes can't hurt me anymore, and I've never heard of them hurting a dead man's family. But I really don't have anything for you. Sorry. Straw swore under her breath. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Luddershall. I have to inform you at this time that a second raising probably wouldn't work. This is your last chance to get anything off your chest that needs saying. The ghost looked around, thinking, not really very much to say. You'd think I'd be full of last words, wouldn't you? We all imagine what we'd like our last words to be. Suppose I ought to say something about my son. How I'd like Helen to raise him, that sort of thing. Drawing a blank, though. How come I don't feel worse about this? That's normal. Your connection to the living world is effectively severed. In practical terms, you've left all your earthly cares behind. No need to feel guilty about it. Well, I don't, which I suppose is a plus. Don't feel anything at all. There were a few moments of silence. So, is that it then? The ghost asked. Afraid so, Straw said, and began snuffing out the candles. With which we move on to the next scene. Let me see what's going on over here in the chat as we have this little break. Crack team of proofreaders. Exactly correct. Can't hear a word. Eddie's in the space-time continuum, and so on. I assume you don't mean the music was playing all the way through that. I'm fairly sure I stopped it before. Is that correct? You've had all that, yes? Okay. Let's move on to the next bit then. There's a little, you know, how sometimes you get a little break. I haven't decided if that bit you've just heard constitutes kind of a prologue of its own, or if that... It probably does, actually. Or if not, then it's just the opening scene. Here then comes the next scene. Oh, it's all right. I read the first line again. So, next scene then. Oh, you can hear my throat's getting all coffee again. Let me mute that. There you go. You don't need to hear me clearing my throat all the time. So, next scene. Jamin Lindrick slouched in the uncomfortable little chair on the other side of the desk. She didn't show the slightest unease on her face, and in fact, Straw thought she saw evidence of a smile there. Usually, if you silently stared a suspect down, they would blurt out something to fill the silence, but Lindrick seemed to love the tension. Slowly and deliberately, she was rolling a stray granule of sapphire under the toe of her boot, making a constant scraping sound against the wooden flooring. Maybe I should change it to, like, stone tile, because that would be more annoying. I'm going to do that. Okay, I've changed it to stone tile. I don't know if there's a proper word for that. Tell me if there is. They couldn't ask her to stop, because they couldn't admit she was succeeding in annoying them. Straw was only keeping it together by imagining what she would yell at the cleaning staff next time she saw them for missing that granule in the first place. Overhead, a tiny phase moth fussed and fluttered around the light cage, attracted by the blue-white glare of the wisp inside, but repelled by the gentle sting it radiated. The moth's enlarged shadow flickered across the desk and flashed over Lindrick's eyes. She didn't flinch. "Well, what a fun time we're having," said Bodmin finally. He was leaning with both elbows on the desk. He did this to appear imposing, but he didn't need to. He already resembled a block of granite in a suit. "I take it from your attitude that you intend not to talk until your advocate gets here?" "I know my rights." It was the first time Lindrick had spoken. "Well, that's good news," said Bodmin, "because I can't be bothered going over them." Draped over the back of Jamin's chair was a light jacket hung inside out, shrugged off when she'd sat down. Aside from the usual personal gem harvester in the inside lining at the waist, Straw noticed the coat was covered in little pockets, inside and out, like Straw's own work coat, except these pockets were of unusually small size. You couldn't force a standard potion bottle into most of them. "Is he on his way?" Jamin asked. Her skin was so paper-thin that it looked like it could tear just from the stress of talking. Straw had seen enough people wither under the effects of Howlite before, and would usually estimate this girl to be at about the halfway stage, but Howlite caused visible white glowing of the blood vessels, and there was certainly nothing about Lindrick that glowed. She looked ill, worn ragged. "He's on his way," Bodmin confirmed, laying a stack of blank notepaper under the lamp at the end of the table and switching it on. Should be here any moment, so let's get the preliminaries over with, shall we? Name? You already have it. It has to come from you. Name? Jamin Lindrick. Occupation? I think I'll wait for my advocate. Oh, very interesting. Keep a note of that, Detective. Straw made a show of writing it down. That is very interesting, Chief. Most people don't have a problem telling us their occupation, do they? They don't, do they? Bodmin said, pretending to think it over. I suppose now you bring it up, for most people it's the most natural thing in the world to tell us their job. Because of course they're registered with the Crown, they can show us their trade jetting. Very simple, but here's one who wants her advocate present for a simple question like that. Makes you wonder how closely we're going to have to examine her answer, doesn't it? Travel vlogger, said Lindrick, cutting the demonstration short. Bodmin snorted. There we go. He glanced over at the desk lamp, which was casting a greenish light onto the stack of paper underneath. I am a travel vlogger, Lindrick insisted, and I could prove it to you if you hadn't confiscated my equipment. I don't have a jeton because my profession isn't recognised by the Crown, because the Crown has had trouble adjusting to the current century. Careful, Straw warned. I am. I'm always careful. Look where it gets me. She shifted position in her chair so that her sleeveless right arm rested across her lap. There was a large patch where the skin had turned maroon just below the shoulder, and another near the wrist, suggesting the first stages of bruising. Straw waited for the Chief to comment, but he didn't say anything. Not again, Bodmin. The silence was broken by a knock on the door. It lasted one knock too many. Bodmin became suddenly animated, pushing up out of his chair. Ah, looks like we have a visitor. If that's not my advocate, Lindrick said, I'm still not talking. Of course, Bodmin smiled. Come in. Without waiting, he pulled open the door himself, with something of a flourish. It wasn't Lindrick's advocate. As she saw the figure in the doorway, still with fist raised to knock, Lindrick stiffened, sitting suddenly upright, as though she were about to run. What's this? She demanded. This, said Bodmin, is one of the officers who will be present during your interview. The newcomer was tall, straightening to at least 3 inches taller than Bodmin, but so thin that it looked alarmingly disproportionate, as if he was liable to fold and topple over. The police uniform looked grotesque, stitched onto this frame, as if its wearer had been stretched like a morning shadow. There were irregular patches where the material had required intensive alteration. The figure's arm drifted down to its side gently, like long hair underwater, the fist uncurling to reveal fingers like spoonworms. The skin, like that of his shapeless face, was a drained bluish white, accented with slight ridges. But the main thing about him was the eyes. Straw couldn't even make a guess at how many there were. The suspect is being relatively cooperative, Bodmin told the newcomer cheerfully. But if she acts up, then you have my permission to, well, you know. A word in private, please, Detective Straw. Frowning, Straw stood. The new officer glided past her to the seat Bodmin had vacated. You are joking, Lindrick said, now with the slightest waver in her voice. Well, someone's got to keep an eye on you while we discuss your immediate future, Bodmin said, ominously, ushering Straw out of the door. See you soon. What does it have permission to do? Lindrick half shouted. What does it have permission to do? Straw saw the new officer glide gently down into the chair before Bodmin closed the door behind them. All right, I'll admit it, Straw said. You've got me with that one. What the hell was that, and what are you playing at? That, detective, is your new partner. And yes, if you must know, I am using him as an intimidation tactic. Seems to have worked on you, and you've dealt with Elagasts before. Think what it's doing to young Jamin in there. I was referring to the tactic, not the individual. I'm perfectly comfortable around Elagasts, and I resent the implication that I have any trouble working with one. I didn't mean to imply... Fine. But she must be terrified in there. How's a kid from the Shutterstack supposed to know how to behave around them? He's from a completely different world. She probably believes that literally. Oh, stop whinging. She'll be fine. The man couldn't be gentler. I already had his files sent over to you. Haven't you read them? I skimmed them, she admitted. Evidently not enough to get to the part about him being an Elagast. Did you hide that in the small print? Bodmin grinned. Something like that. Mostly I was just distracted by the handwriting. It's flawless. I know. It's the way they move. Straw kicked a few stray sapphire granules over to the skirting board, tutting angrily. Do we even have a cleaner anymore? What's the point if they don't get all of it? That's a safety hazard, that is. Give them a chance. It's probably my lot tracked that in when they brought Lindrick inside. She's a wriggly one. One sergeant less and she'd have been off. Harvest it up yourself if you're bothered. She glared at him again, for all the good it ever did. I don't need charity, Bodmin. I need to feel as if this whole place isn't running on sheer luck and incompetence. Can we please go back in? I don't want Lindrick's advocate showing up only to find his client has died of fright. You'll get in trouble. For what? For providing employment to an underprivileged member of society? How do you think it would look on anyone who complained? But you're right, that's long enough. I just wanted to say, though, while we're on our own, I'm not kidding around. This really is happening. They've been training him for years. It's part of a cultural outreach thing. And of course, he's been sent to me because of my involvement with Tashan Hospital. It's going to be a new experience for all of us. Are you sure you'll be all right? She stopped glaring at him, which was her way of glaring even harder. Of course I will. What makes you... Have I ever done anything to make you believe otherwise? No, no. He raised his hands in mock defence. Just making sure you're ready, that's all. This is a sensitive situation. I want to be sure none of us gives off the slightest impression of discomfort around a member of his species. They can see it a mile off. Well, you imagine so. Straw didn't laugh. If we're being careful, she said, in a measured tone, we need to be careful across the board, not just about how we treat officers. Are we going to have to field any questions about Lindrick's arrest? She was caught sneaking around a road I didn't even know existed. It's open and shut. I don't mean whether it was warranted, she said. Bodmin looked as though he was preparing a response when the loud creaking of the door at the other end of the corridor drew their attention away. Desk Sergeant Norbin was leaning in, looking harried. Now, a note on Desk Sergeant Norbin. That name just popped into my head, and I've realised it was probably from Sergeant Nobby from Discworld. So, you know, I'll probably change that. But for now, the guy on the desk is Desk Sergeant Norbin. Sir, he called, but it was clear what he wanted to warn them about. A suited figure pushed past him into the corridor, marching with purpose, a folder full of loose sheets of paper under one arm. Bodmin, the man called, somewhere between a greeting and an accusation. He kicked some sapphire out of his way. Still can't afford to have the place swept, I see. Can't wait to see what you've got for me today. She'll be in there, I suppose. Bodmin groaned. It was Pulbrook. Of course it was Pulbrook. Come on then, Pulbrook said, not breaking stride as he went for the door. Let's get this done before lunch. I've got a client, and I've got another client in an hour. There was the usual shaking of hands. To his credit, Pulbrook appeared not to blanch at the presence of an Elagast, even one in police uniform, which Straw had to admit made him look something like a novelty doll. Let me just check that none of you are telling me that the stream has gone wrong in some way. Ceramic tile, yes, I think you could be right there. That's what I'm looking for. Yes, let's change that to ceramic tile. Where is it? There we go. Thank you. Stone tile, stone pavers, stone floor. Ooh, gosh. Well, that's the thing. Cobblestone's given the period. Actually, the period is, well, I mean, it's not a real place, but it's more advanced than you might think. This is a slightly backward place, but they do, somewhere in the world, have travel vloggers. We shall be hearing more about where in the world they have those soon.
Hello.
I couldn't impress it upon you to heat up my tea at all, could I? While
1 second.
Oh, you're playing it. Never mind.
No, it's fine. I need to go to safe space anyway.
Okay, she's playing an unpausable game, so I don't mean to... Okay, so to carry on. Right then, Bodmin said, beginning proceedings. You're now acquainted with your advocate, who has read all of the paperwork. Is that to your satisfaction? Are you safe to talk now? Let's find out, said Lindrick. Pulbrook nodded his satisfaction. I think it will only need 25 seconds. Thank you. All right then. Miss Lindrick, Bodmin began. You were apprehended this afternoon at your home on Burnmill Road. Apprehended, Lindrick parroted. Is that what you call it? This is because you were sighted yesterday by officers of this station lurking on the track which runs between Church Lane and the Horseman's Loop. What was your business there? General interest. With her advocate present, she was looking more comfortable in her deeply uncomfortable chair. Next to Bodmin, the new officer didn't move a muscle. You could believe he was carved out of marble if you hadn't seen him sit down. General interest, said Bodmin, leaning forwards. Having a good look around, were you? Polbrook interrupted. Is an implication being made? There's nothing out of the ordinary about either Church Lane or the Loop from what I can tell, thank you, and no legal reason why my client should not have been walking between the two. You're quite right, Bodmin agreed. There's nothing very intriguing to be found in either location. Except for your client. The church has been locked up for nearly 70 years, and Horseman's is a holdover from the days before the factories opened on Knowles Heath, which sealed the track off physically. Nobody, in other words, has been back there in 20 years. Unless they were up to something. Remember Staley? Straw offered. That's more or less where we found him, isn't it? 4 years ago? I do remember Staley. What was it he turned out to be again? Oh, now what was it? Said Straw, hamming it up. It wouldn't be... He wasn't a vision mage, was he? Can't have been, said Bodmin. Course not. Silly idea. I was examining the area, said Lindrick with conviction. I don't deny it. Polbrook looked like he had 9 different objections queued up. No, let her talk, Bodmin insisted. For a video, obviously, she said. Insights from Places Out of Sight, a series on what we can learn about ourselves by examining the forgotten places that society... Enough, Bodmin said, his eyes having screwed shut quite by themselves. Well, I think this is no way to treat my client. Polbrook had raised his hands to the sky as if he was trying to scoop up some sort of sense. 1 minute she's encouraged to talk as though the future of legal justice depended on it, and the next her words are waved off as unimportant and presumptive. Why are we here exactly, Chief Bodmin? The Elegast tilted his head slightly in thought, causing Lindrick to jump. She shrank back in her chair, the closest she could get to running away. Bodmin pointed an accusing finger at Lindrick. You are here because you were seen examining a concealed and usually deserted area, an area you've never seen before, and showing every sign of committing it to memory as completely as possible. Yes, she said. I was. I'd never been there before, and so it was interesting. What on earth is wrong with that? You know very well what's wrong with that. Well, I don't, said Polbrook, of course. It's perfectly ordinary to explore a town, and unless my reading is out of date, the act of forming memories has not yet been made illegal. Sir, my client is a collector of impressions. Travel vlogger is a perfectly legal, if eccentric, proudly eccentric, Lindrick amended, proudly eccentric profession. If she had been spotted breaking or attempting to break any law, then perhaps there might have been merit in arresting her and bringing her in for questioning, but this is not what was done. Instead, if I have my facts right, you had your men break down the door of her private residence the following day and subject her right in her own home to the kind of physical treatment usually reserved for rabid animals. Bodmin appeared to have no answer ready to counter this. Lindrick rested her injured arm on the table as conspicuously as possible. Let's not dance around the subject, Polbrook concluded. You are sceptical about the validity of my client's stated profession. That is because your prejudice, yes, your prejudice, despite your well-known stance on certain races, he glanced at the new officer as he said this, prevents you from accepting that it is in fact a real job. It might well be a real job somewhere, Polbrook, Bodmin snarled, but here in Ammerkeep there isn't much call for travel vloggers. No, indeed, Polbrook replied, which is why she travelled to Ammerkeep to produce her content instead of from it. The Elegast moved again, this time with an intake of breath as if he was about to speak. Even Polbrook seemed startled this time. Lindrick's patience broke. Are they serious about this? She was indicating the new officer, who closed his mouth and returned to his previous position, politely observing. The dark ink-blot streaks that stretched back around his bean-like skull shimmered slightly. Something tells me we'll find out soon enough, Polbrook replied. Bodmin, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but it smells like intimidation to me. Everything we've learned today about my client's behaviour is perfectly in keeping with the activities of a creator of Ribbon's Region non-luminant diversions in particular, or with a curious or creative person in general. Combine this with the fact that my client has never been a victim of mandatory perspective. Oh, come on, Straw snapped. Nor seen the inside of a vault for any crime. And I believe we find that unless you have any evidence of actual wrongdoing, she is legally free at this time to leave the building. Straw heard Bodmin sucking in a long lungful of air. He was trying to think of something, But they all knew there was no real evidence. He jumped the gun again. This was always a risk. It had been Bodmin's idea a few years ago to encourage guards to find and patrol the hidden corners of Throstlenest, the places where nobody went. In theory, if you could catch a vision mage on their initial examination of a hidden spot, you could sew up a whole case before the first vision was cast. The problem was that it was hard to justify because, frankly, it hardly ever worked. This was not the first time he'd fought too hard for a result that just wasn't going to happen. "Nothing?" said Polbrook. "Right, in that case, good afternoon. I'll escort Miss Lindrick out, don't trouble yourselves. You," he said to the Elegast, who merely looked up at him in reply, "don't move until she is safely out of the room, or I'll file against the station for intimidation, and I wouldn't be surprised if you hear from me again regarding treatment of suspects." Bodmin was sizzling. Now, did you notice I read that wrong? He's supposed to be threatening them about the bruises on her arms, but I made it sound as if it was on the occasion that he files against the station for intimidation. Let me just make a note of that. There we go. Bodmin was sizzling. You could have cooked a chicken by waving it near his face. He lifted up from his chair, like a shipping crate being winched up. "Jamin Lindrick," he said, with the care of someone who had his toes hooked under the handle to stop him from flying off it. "The eyes of the law are on you now. It would benefit us both if I never saw or heard anything about you ever again." When they were gone, he stalked over to the corner and jammed his hands into his pockets. Straw knew him well enough to know he was concentrating very hard on not putting a hole through the wall. She switched off the Moorland lamp and retrieved the stack of papers from underneath it. She shuffled through them, glancing down the interview transcript that now covered them in a looping script only slightly more careful than the new officer's handwriting, a sharp green glow still shining from the words. "You'd better tell me if there's something I need to worry about here," said Straw. "I'm not going through another Matthew Willan for you. We only scraped through that one because of your name and because of what a dung-cart that guy was. This Lindrick, as far as we know, hasn't done a single thing wrong, and if she has, it's a low-level conjure. Handling her like that, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking that when a suspect is fighting the officers who are trying to arrest her, there's only so gentle you can be and still get her in the cart. Don't worry, I've got witnesses who'll testify that she was resisting." "And was she?" "Yes." "So, good. Now, what about us? Do we actually have anything on her?" "No, of course not, but it's damn well obvious, isn't it?" "Excuse me?" They both turned, surprised. The Elegast's voice was a lot higher and softer than they expected. He rose to his feet with the precision of a dancer. "I think I'm missing some information." "Good point," Bodmin admitted. "Straw, this is something I wanted to bring up with you. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's a lot riding on this appointment, so I want you to get him thinking properly. He'll bring a lot to the table that we haven't had before, but we also need him able to make the mental connections that your average detective takes for granted, and that's your job." "Right," Straw sighed, and held out a hand for the Elegast to shake. "In that case, I'm Detective Straw, and it looks like we're going to be spending time together." She braced herself, but when the Elegast took her hand, there was nothing. She glanced at Bodmin, silently admonishing herself for expecting the fingers to be slimy. "I've read your papers, but I'm not much good with the language, I'm afraid. Some of your more obscure glyphs still get me. How is your name pronounced, exactly?" The Elegast blinked, a process which rippled back along the sides of his head as dozens of tiny eyelids reacted at different speeds. Straw had encountered plenty of Elegasts before, but from a distance the eyes tended to blend together, resembling camouflage stripes against the pale skin. Closer than she'd ever been to one of their kind before, the myriad tiny eyes looked like black bubbles in froth. "My name's Winthrop," he said. "Timothy Winthrop." "Oh, I know. Simpler than it looks, isn't it? Our written language is ancient and gorgeous to look at, and a lot of humans seem to think it's an indicator of how different we are, but the actual spoken syllables are the same. You'd think it would make it easier for us to, integrate, but so far it hasn't worked." "Yes, well," said Straw, let's get you integrated into the police force, shall we?" "Oh, yes, please," Winthrop said, nodding enthusiastically. "I don't need to tell you what a huge honour this is, sir." "Just Straw," she said. "Tell me what you know so far about that girl in there." Said Winthrop. Her name's Jamin Lindrick. She claims to be a travel vlogger, but the chief doesn't believe her. Because... Oh, well, I assumed he'd encountered her before. Nope, said Bodmin. Never seen her before today. What do you know about her just by looking? Straw asked, putting him on the spot. Well, she's... Winthrop floundered a bit. Young? Come on, Straw urged. Think like a detective. Oh, I don't think I'm quite at that stage. You are, said Bodmin. Your lot do run things a bit differently, but you came with very strong references from trusted friends of mine at Gazelvenge. Between your promising career over there and the test materials I sent over, you're trained up to roughly the same level Straw was when she started here. Oh, I doubt that, Winthrop began, but Straw nodded. It's true. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly, said Bodmin. Barring an earthquake, you'll be out with her today, so you better get your sleuthing head on. Oh, right, well then, let's see. She was standoffish, at least with you. I actually think she was a bit scared of me. Suppose I'll have to expect that, at least for a while. What about her physique? Straw pressed. Describe her physically. Scrawny, said Winthrop. Emaciated. You could really see what the whole bones situation was like with her. The books will tell you that's a sign of prolonged howlite abuse, but in her case you can see that it isn't. How? Well, her haze is all wrong. She's lit up from something, but it isn't howlite. Straw and Bodmin exchanged glances. Bodmin was grinning. She's lit up, Straw said. Yeah, she's obviously been using or channeling some sort of magic in the last few days, but I'm afraid I didn't think to pick out what sort. What sort? It's different eyes for that, you see, and I didn't know you were going to ask. He paused, noticing their expressions. Oh, you can't see that at all? It's not even faint, you just can't see it. Not at all, said Straw. I think you might be quite useful to have around, Winthrop. So, what does it mean? Magic user? Dangerously skinny? Not going to be much use at heavy lifting, which tells us what? Which tells us... Oh! Yes. I get it! Yes. Well, she's probably a vision mage. They're always physically very slight on account of how draining it is to keep illegal visions running. It's as clear as day, Bodmin said. But that's not enough anymore. There was a time before your Polbrook started to show up when we'd have had her in the cells for a little while, just long enough to scare her and not long enough for her to be missed. And when we let her out, we'd have another set of eyes and ears on the streets. Remember that, Straw? There are still ways. We just have to go the long way round now. Winthrop was nodding, trying to catch up. So you think she was snooping around in that lane because she'd been employed to create a vision set there? If I was planning something I shouldn't, said Bodmin, I'd want to do it in some forgotten spot that isn't patrolled, and I'd want to know that nobody could see me do it, even after the fact. And that means hiring a vision mage, who has the area memorised. I say someone, and no, we don't know who, was paying her to get a good look at the place ahead of time. But, said Straw, we do need to prove it. Travel vlogger, Bodmin spat. Do you see a lot of those? Winthrop asked. In here? Yes. Anywhere else in the world? Never once. It's an excuse to explain why they're always snooping around. Thanks to Polbrook, we might never find out what Lindrick was hired to cover up. I've diverted a couple of guards to keep the place watched anyway. Now I just have to hope the gap they've left on their old beat doesn't get exploited the same way. Here, Straw said, holding the notes out to Winthrop. You take these, read over them later, see if you can find anywhere she gave herself away. It's useful to learn how to recognise when a suspect has said more than they mean to. For now, though, I want you in your outdoor gear quick as you can. Apparently, you and me are going out on duty. All right, that's the end of the next scene. I'm going to carry on. You know, there you go. That's the next scene. That's some characters set up. Ian, when did you come in? I'll fill you in quickly on what you might have missed. Maybe change sizzling to fuming or incandescent. Yeah, maybe. Although the sizzling is there purely because I think you hear words like fuming and incandescent, and I thought I'd make it a bit more interesting, really, by having the bit about cooking chicken by waving it near his face. I might be going too far there, but I'll certainly take it into consideration next time. Okay, so some of you may have noticed, by the way, Are you following along with me so far? Is it all making sense? I mean, I know there's a lot of I'm not sure about some of the oblique references in that last section to, we don't know what a vision mage is. We don't know what half of sort of what they're accusing her of is. We're going to find out pretty quickly, but people might. I don't want people to feel confused out of the gate. So let me know how you felt about that bit, if you were particularly confused in any particular moments, and if that happens again, tell me in the chat. Be like, what? And I'll either explain it to you then, but I'll certainly make a note of the fact that you didn't know what I was on about, because then I can decide whether it's a good idea or not to keep you in the dark. Okay, so Ian, so far what you've missed is that basically there's this detective woman, and she works in what is obviously a fantasy world, but they have it's not completely like medieval. There are travel vloggers elsewhere in the world. This country hasn't quite caught up with modern tech just yet, but it's on its way, and there are granules of sapphire that are just like strewn about the place, left to be tidied up, and they're not, nobody's going, wow, jewels. They're kind of an annoyance. You'll be hearing more about them in the very next bit, but that's where we are so far. How long between scenes is it established as to what a vision mage does? Like, why is it a threat? Well, exactly. You are, hopefully, if I've got enough time tonight, you're going to be finding out exactly what they are in just tonight's bit. The question is, yes, do I leave it too long or not? Okay, pause a moment while I blow my nose again. And back we are. Hello again. Okay, so next scene then. And there's a note here telling me that I've missed something out. Oh, by the way, don't know if you noticed, but Winthrop is very much based on the... his appearance is very much based on the creepy rowers that I mistakenly saw in Daley Thompson's Super Test. Because I thought, hey, they're great. I don't want them to go to waste, except in the picture I drew of them, they're sort of muscly rowers, apart from the heads, whereas Winthrop is very, very sort of tall and thin and strange looking. And the stripes going around the backs of their heads are not stripes in this, they're millions of eyes. But if you see them from a distance, they look like stripes. What do we have? I mean, writers like Jim Butcher kind of do a similar thing, but they provide a cursory explanation without overstating the threat. Yeah, I think I might need to put something in along those lines. Hello. Hello, Meg. Now, I wouldn't be too afraid to introduce concepts the reader may not immediately understand. Sanderson does it, and he's praised for his well-being. Yes, quite right. It's a question of... There's two things at stake. It's a question of how do I'm also not against introducing it, and I think I will. The problem is, and this is a big problem, I think what's the term for it? Maid and butler dialogue. That's something you should avoid in writing, and I'm having trouble. So far, I haven't figured out a way to put in a basic explanation of what a vision mage is that doesn't fall into this trap. And a maid and butler dialogue is where it comes from old plays from a particular period. I couldn't tell you anymore. In fact, it might be an actual play. Where, you know how the line, "It was a dark and stormy night," actually comes from an actual book, or short story, or whatever it was, and it's just become a cliche. Well, even though, basically, there's nothing wrong with that line the first time. I suppose it's not great, but, well, maid and butler dialogue was bad from the off, because that's where the whole play opens with a maid and a butler walking through the set, which is made to resemble a large house, and they say, "As you know, the master has been away these 12 weeks and is expecting a wife," and da-da-da-da. And then the maid goes like, "Yes, and as you know," and you know what I mean? They tell each other stuff that they would already know, and it's just for the audience. I'm trying to come up with a way of explaining vision mages that isn't that. Now, it's possible that the upcoming scenes do that job, But I agree. I think they're a little bit distant. But let's not make them any more distant. Let's carry on. So, next scene. There's a note for myself here, by the way, that says, this is our first time in Winthrop's head. We're now going to switch to his POV. So, put us there. Give us some Winthrop before we carry on with the story. Either something about his life, his ambitions, his current situation. This is him. Make it count. And I've told myself that because I frankly haven't done that in the current draft. So, that's for next time. That's for the next draft. So, what have you got for me, Grum? Straw asked. Her work coat clacked and rattled as she lifted it off the rack, the pockets weighing it down. Winthrop wondered whether he would be required to carry that amount of equipment before long, and if he'd be able to move under the weight of it. The coat hung off her like a cape until she drew it closed. The collar was tall enough to almost touch her moss-coloured hair. He swallowed the comparison immediately. It wasn't the proper way to describe the colour. But he couldn't remember the preferred term. He couldn't deny it looked greenish, but he'd never make a point of blurting it out. "We've got a disappearance," a new voice answered her from outside, further down the corridor. "Male, mid-40s, ordinary job, which he didn't show up for last week. Ordinary home, which he's missing from. We've questioned his family, estranged. They don't seem to think he'd had any unpleasant connections, although debt wouldn't be a surprise. His jetton hasn't been registered at the gate, so he's somewhere in Throstlenest if he's anywhere at all. Either he's literally vanished into thin air, or something interesting's going on." The new voice sounded female but gravelly. A lifelong pipe smoker, he guessed. Winthrop slid his drawer closed after extracting the gloves he was looking for, twisted the handle to lock, and then allowed himself a peep out of the door. Straw was talking to an individual the like of which he'd never seen before. Grum was about half Straw's height, with a spine that was doubled over in such a way as to threaten her knuckles on rough ground if it weren't for the fact that her hands were extremely thick and rugged, and she seemed to rest on them as much as on her feet. Her face was round, and seemed to consist mostly of two big eyes, set low and wide, with an upturned brownish nose between them, like a hedgehog's. The resemblance didn't end there, in fact. Her face was ringed with a wide, bristly mane, the colour of sand, which reached to her shoulders as far as Winthrop could tell, although it was possible it continued all the way down her back, hidden underneath her thick jumper, which was purple, stripy, and had sapphire granules threaded into it at intervals that made them resemble a light gemfall. She was the first person he'd seen at the station out of uniform. Unless this was a sort of uniform he'd never heard of. He'd certainly never seen a member of whichever species Grum was. She fizzed with a visible haze, not dissimilar to Jamin Lindrick's, but fuzzier, like it was mixed together from a lot of different magical energy fields. A lot of police had it. Presumably it was what happened to you if you visited enough crime scenes. Thank you. "What do we think?" Straw asked. "Dead?" "No, he's been gone several days and no sign of a body," said Grum, drawing a key out of a pocket and throwing it up to Straw. "If he'd been dumped in the sewer, there'd be people complaining of blockage by now, and nobody disposes of bodies in the rivers anymore, not since Stonecroft's filters. Home is exactly as he left it, and that's including toothbrush and purse." Straw used the key to unlock a large cabinet that stood in a recess in the wall. The lock was just higher than Grum could have reached. Still, just checking, I was still streaming. "Doesn't rule out an illicit lover," Straw suggested. "They show up, our man disappears quietly off for a few days, perhaps in enough of a hurry to leave everything behind." "Always possible, but his wife hates him, so there's no reason he'd keep it quiet. We're looking at magic here. I'd put Ruby on it. No criminal connections, though, so if it's more than a single layer job, I'd be very surprised. Might be a good learning experience for your, Ah, yes." Straw turned and just gestured for him to come over. "Winthrop, you should meet our puffer, Alemsey Grum." "Illusory technician," Grum corrected, reaching out to shake hands. Her entire body tilted as the fist left the ground. "Timothy Winthrop," he said. "I think I'm Detective Straw's, trainee," said Straw. "Well, this should be good training," said Grum, returning her fist to the floor with a heavy thump. "Straw eats up cases like this one. A man disappears, we don't know how or why, and our clonkers noticed nothing out of the ordinary at his last known location." "And what does that last point tell us, Winthrop?" Straw pressed. Right, let's see. Clonkers, officers of the constabulary, they didn't find any clues, which means that an advanced form of magic may have been... "It means," Straw interrupted, "that as soon as we get there, there'll be a big, gigantic clue staring us right in the face. The men only ever notice anything's amiss if they find a room full of blood and smashed glass, and then they'll all be very helpful by suggesting there may have been a fight. We work on a higher plane, Winthrop. Although I've never been able to figure out why. The clues we'll be looking for are usually just as obvious as a ceiling splashed with viscera. Have you got a blank warrant on you, LMZ? Oh, this one's going to be a quick approval, said Grum, pulling out a small pocket scroll. Straw dropped it into her coat, giving back the key in return. Right then, Grum said with an air of finality, and opened the cabinet. Winthrop wasn't sure what he was looking at initially. It seemed like the cabinet was solid behind its door, just a block of wood with vertical slices cut through it. Then, as Grum grabbed a couple of upward-facing handles at her head height, which had just enough space around them for her fingers to grip, Winthrop thought he understood, and as she backed away from the cabinet, pulling the handles towards her, his suspicion was confirmed. It was a complicated contraption, consisting of countless slim strips of wood, nailed and hinged together, and all folded up into a dense block that filled the inside of the cabinet perfectly. The whole thing unfolded with a ratcheting sound as she drew the two handles down towards her feet. Creaking wooden arms cranked up and over Grum's head, and some reached and folded around behind her, until finally she stood at the centre of a wavering nest of wooden arms, levers, pulleys, and at the extremities a great deal of mirrors. She began slotting bottles of coloured liquid into various cup-shaped slots all around her, then attaching parts of the mechanism to them with clasps. Her fists gripping the controls were now flanked by wooden guard pieces, but it looked as if her knuckles still touched the floor despite them. Perhaps tactile feedback from the ground was important to her species. "Well," Winthrop said, unable to keep his delight inside. "I must say." "Like it? Watch this." Grum took up a small handle in front of her, set into a circular wooden plate with symbols carved around its edge, which in turn was mounted on a larger plate. She wound the handle, and some of the mechanisms along her back moved in sympathy, clicking and locking into new positions every time the symbols lined up with a small notch in the base plate. Settling on her setting, she grinned up at Winthrop. "Good, isn't it? Straw demands the best work, and that means using the best apparatus." "But where did you get it?" "Oh, the standard issue back home. I called in a couple of favours. You won't see another like it in Hammerkeep." "Back home? Where's that?" Grum gaped at him. "Where do you think? What do I look like, an elf?" "I'm afraid I'm not familiar with your species," Winthrop said hesitantly. Grum burst out laughing. "You're adorable so far," she said, and twisting the handles in her large hand so that the whole mechanism shrugged inwards to fit a smaller space, she went waddling out towards the station's front doors. "Oh dear," said Winthrop. "I haven't offended her, have I?" "Who, Grum? I don't think it's possible." "Well, are you ready to go?" "I think so." Winthrop pulled on the reinforced gloves he'd been issued when he first arrived. They were padded with rough, thick material at the fingertips and palms to protect against broken glass when potions needed to be deployed quickly. He patted his uniform in a few places, checking the vials were all there. "All right," said Straw. "On we go then, before we lose the light. Grum!" Across the reception room, Grum kicked out from inside her apparatus, striking the door with a foot. It swung open, and rich violet light streamed in, promising a good journey. Okay, let me check the chat. Have vision mages defined in the police identifier handbook or something? Yeah, I could do. Do you know, yes, you're right. I don't need to do it with dialogue. I can just, and I've been getting a bit braver about this recently with with later chapters. I can just have a paragraph that tells you a basic version of what it is. Vision mages were da 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 da. But I kind of want to keep it a secret. I'll have to word it carefully so that because here's the problem. I don't want to confuse the reader by not telling them what I'm talking about, but I also don't want to overload the reader and give them what's called a high learning curve, a steep learning curve rather, by making them feel that they're expected to learn what a vision mage is from I don't want to put Skyrim lore down for them to read when they can just read this chapter and sort of experience what they are. So I think I'll put something that makes it sound like honestly something that's not much better than a vision mage is a mage who casts visions, but then explain it later. We'll see. Okay, next scene. This is what they do. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Getting all bunged up, so I'm going to blow my nose again. Hang on. Too much talking, not enough water drunk through the day, I suspect. Okay, there's a note to myself that I'm not going to read you at the moment because it's kind of a spoiler. The sunlight was a bluish purple this morning as they rode one of the station's carts towards the eastern corner of Throstlenest. Straw had the bar, with Winthrop next to her in the passenger seat, and behind them was Grum, roosting on the back-facing bench, with her nest of gears and mirrors reaching out behind them, like the crumpled legs of a dead spider, wooden knees bobbing and jigging as the cart bounced along. The edges of the road were lined with sapphire granules where hooves and wheels had knocked them away. A thicker heap had yet to be cleared from the bank to the right, and a group of children, belonging to Hemley and Alderstock of the nearby village, Straw noticed, meaning those families were on speaking terms again, were kicking through them in the usual way. The sharper stones had left scratches and cuts which would need closing and cleansing when they got home. Mrs. Alderstock would no doubt be found at the potion stall again in the morning. And if Mr. Alderstock happened to come up with any funny ideas at the pub tonight, Straw would be able to appear at the market to question his wife, and her general appearance of being in all places at once would be upheld. First rule of detective work, Straw said suddenly, like a trumpet in a library. Be ready to note down all observations, however insignificant, Winthrop finished automatically. Always carry a pen and notebook. Grum laughed. Finally, someone who follows the rules. Now you can use his pen, Straw, instead of always having to borrow mine. Good, said Straw, but I wasn't asking you to recite the training manual, I'm telling you. This is a teaching moment. The first rule of detective work, according to Detective Straw, Scourge of the Throstlenest Underground, Grum added, in a sidelong sort of way, is that everything that exists can be found. Never, ever abandon a search for a thing just because you appear to have no leads. Everything can be figured out. Lost your keys? You'll find them. If you think back over every single thing you did between now and when you last had them, it is a tedious process, but you end up with your keys back in your hand. The same principle applies to an elusive piece of evidence or a missing murder weapon. If you can apply a bit of deductive reasoning and figure out what... the reason I paused there is that I feel duty-bound to tell you that days, maybe 2 days after I wrote the line, everything can be figured out, lost your keys, you'll find them if you think back over every single thing you did between now and when you last had them. It's a tedious process, but you end up with your keys back in your hand. That day, or the next day, or a couple of days later, I lost my wedding ring. And we were completely unable to find it. And I've still not got it. And that was what? Maybe a year ago or something. So that's that. We've been not married for a year. That's not how it works.
It's fine.
Just completely gone. I had it on. Then we went out. Went for a lovely walk in the park. Came home, no ring. No, actually, halfway around the park I noticed we got no ring. So we carefully looked all the way through the remainder of the park. We retraced our steps. No sign.
I didn't mean to sound that.
It's all right. Okay. Still streaming? Still streaming? Because you never know what'll go on with these things, do you? Yes, I appear still to be streaming. Okay. I know. Yeah. So. Right. If you can apply a bit of deductive reasoning and figure out what your suspect was trying to do, you can find their trail and gather evidence. And conversely, if you can find the evidence they leave behind, you can figure out what they were trying to do. You have to sort of wriggle your way into both at once, but it tends to get easier once you're away. And once you have a lead, Winthrop ventured, the hunt can be sped up with a bit of magic? Of course. Straw patted her coat, which resounded with the clinking of little glass containers. But you can't just throw potions around. You have to start with a bit of thinking. Ah! Or the potion's magic doesn't have a focal point. No, God no, the potions would still work perfectly. You just run out of them. We're operating on limited resources here, and you might as well remember that, because the chief will be quick to remind you otherwise. Hello. Up ahead, a cluttered line of buildings marked the beginning of the city's central clusters, where building and rebuilding over centuries had robbed the architecture of any single identity. Sift guttering threaded the walls in such a tight weave that it gave the impression of a town straining in a net. The town cast a bluish silhouette against the purple sky. Violet sky, Straw said. What does it mean, Winthrop? Time, Winthrop offered, eliciting a laugh from Grum, then calmed down and answered properly. From the shade, I'd say it's coming through kinda night. Correct, Straw said, looking upwards. Any ruby? Winthrop spluttered. I think we'd have heard if there was any ruby coming around, wouldn't we? An early Halloween would make the headlines. And that's in brackets. It's not going to be Halloween, but there is a sort of a... They have a sort of spooky holiday, and I'll come up with a name for it later. I think we'd have heard if there was any Ruby coming around, wouldn't we? An early Halloween would make the headlines. Not early enough for anyone to do anything about it, said Straw. The less prepared the populace is for an appearance of Ruby, the better. As it happens, the Ministry of Forecasting has predicted we'll see a few stray granules overhead sometime soon. Eyes peeled. But for now, it's just the kind of night, which means people travelling, like us, will find themselves at their destination more quickly than at any other time. Often discovering they somehow skipped a neighbourhood or two along the way. Quite right. She indicated behind them, and Winthrop smiled to see a small village, which he definitely didn't remember passing through, receding into the distance. And time management tends to be better, he added. You can get more done on a purple morning. Correct again. A productive day ahead, Straw said, taking one hand from the bar to twist the contents of her coat pockets into a flatter arrangement. Winthrop saw that at least one pocket was filled with what looked like seeds. Perfect morning for training a rookie, Grum said over her shoulder. Exactly. Incidentally, Winthrop, do you see it as purple like we do? Or do you have a more, complex perspective? I suppose I don't know for sure, Winthrop said. It isn't all one single flat colour like ink, if that's what you mean. There are definitely subtleties and shades to it. Over there, for instance, the trees on the hill. The light seems bluer there, and pinker way down at the end of the road. Oh no, that's the same for me too, said Straw. How about the sky itself? Winthrop smiled. Well, it's beautiful to look at. Straw patted him on the shoulder approvingly. We have that in common as well. But for instance, see that patch of alexandrite up there? She pointed. Winthrop followed her finger up to where, emerging from behind a cloud, a patch of colour the same as the ocean hung, its edges drifting slowly and subtly, blending into and shifting the shape of rubellite and zircon patches surrounding it. Traces of their colour spread blearily into the sea of sapphire that stretched over most of the sky, until in the north, where the sun shone through, it was the purple stones that became dominant. It's a pleasant shade, Winthrop said. But as well as just the colour, I take it you can see something extra. You were able to tell that Jamin Lindrick was a regular magic user at a glance. The sky must be absolutely burning with it. It does have a strong haze to it, yeah, the strongest. There's nothing that matches it. What does it look like? Well, Winthrop said, puzzling over the thought. It doesn't really look like anything else. It'd be like trying to describe colour to someone born blind. I suppose in a way it's like a crisp, bright, sizzling. Huh, fascinating. They rode on quietly for a while, Straw pausing now and then to reach out to her side to scratch the horse. She'd met drivers who could achieve a similar effect with a practiced flick of the control handles, but she didn't like the idea. She preferred to think of horses as something closer to friends than engine vehicles that needed a kickstart. If we're going to work together, she said eventually, I'll need to know something about your prospects as an investigator. I'll have to build up a working idea of what your skill set is like. Oh, of course, said Winthrop. I don't intend to be secretive, sir. If I did, I could have stayed home. We're separated from humans by several degrees there, but I came here because I wanted to join your team. Good, she said. I hope that's true. If this works out, it's a very exciting prospect. I won't press you too hard on your first day, but I need to know, is there any truth to some of the rumours I may have heard? Some exaggeration. Wherever I can be of particular help, beyond what you're used to, I won't be shy about telling you. Straw smiled in satisfaction. Good. I have to say, I'm starting to feel a bit excited about this. Me too, sir. I'm going to leave myself a note here because he says that Elegas are separated from humans by several degrees. That has since become more nuanced. As I've sort of made up more about his country. Okay. Moving on. References. That takes you back to what? Oh, tutorial. Yeah. Okay, we still going? Okay, next bit. Oh, I quite like this bit, which suggests it's probably going to get cut out, because I think I ramble here. But I like it. Everyone knew the famous images of Throstle Nest as seen from the Minister's Tower. A dense block of roofs, sifting chutes and chimney stacks, the narrow streets appearing as thin fault lines between all the brick, as though the architecture had shaken and cracked apart. One such street, whose peculiar waving path had invited the name of Mousetail Run, began at one of the bridges connecting Hatterspatch Square to the outer city. But then it just kept going. It was thought to follow the natural shape of the unspoiled land, but Throstlenest's claws were now so deep into the terrain, its basements and buried chambers now so many layers thick, that there was no divining the shape of the land anymore. So Mousetail Run jittered onwards, winding around the base of Reaver's Warning, a conspicuous hill topped with a crest of iron spines taller than a man, which was said to have been set there before the town's first brick had been laid. The entirety of the hill had been cobbled and built upon over the centuries since, until it resembled the shell of a particularly inhabited tortoise. The street wriggled through another 1.5 miles of unrelenting city, tossing up on both sides a nearly unbroken wall of crushed, crammed-together housing. The crooked panels bowed and strained like too many books packed onto a shelf. Fat and twisting, sifting pipes curled from the sloped roofs and plunged into the... Start again. Fat and twisting, sifting pipes curled from the sloped roofs and plunged into the lower walls. Do you know what? I'm going to put twisted, because twisting, sifting, you might not know whether it's like, are they fat, twisting and sifting? But they're meant to be fat and twisted, sifting pipes. Curled from the sloped roofs and plunged into the lower walls. Occasionally they spasmed and emitted their deep clattering sounds as the building's inhabitants released the gem granules collected inside, giving off the impression that those pipes were the only restraints keeping the rows from bursting apart and spilling into the street. Straw drew the ends of the steering handles inwards, putting gentle pressure on the horse's shoulders, slowing him down. "Here they are," she announced. Up ahead, a section on the left was roped off and attended by guards, stiffly packed into their wood-stuffed brigandines and capes. They waved to the cart as it approached. "So, Winthrop," Straw said, "you're about to examine your first crime scene outside of training conditions. There's been no mention of a corpse yet, and I imagine the first response clonkers would have found one if there was one, so no need to prepare yourself for that. But don't let anything surprise you. We have to look, we have to think." She eased the steering bar to the left, urging the horse towards a nook in the left-hand wall. Above it, the roof simply raised up an extra story, as if the row was lifting the hem of its skirt to step over them. Still, it was a small space, and there was hardly room to clamber out of the cart. "In Ribbon's Rest," said Winthrop, "they don't have the horses at the side of the cart. Did you know that? They put them in front, to pull the cart directly along behind them. It's very clever. It saves space on the roads." Grum laughed. "And how do you think they park them? They'd be too long to fit in a bay like this." "Well, that's exactly it. The bays would have to be longer, I suppose, but think of how much room you'd have left over at the side. Getting out wouldn't be a problem." "Wouldn't be a problem here either, if they'd just build the bays wider. What makes you think Ribbon's Rest architects are any less stingy with space than ours?" "Oh, they're better inventors over there," he said. "I bet their bays detect the size of the vehicle and adjust their capacity." "I imagine they have a fancy way of securing the animal as well," said Straw, handing coiled rope to Winthrop. "Until we adopt it here, we'll have to go the old-fashioned route. Tie him up, will you, and you can tell Alemsey all about Ribbon's Rest when we're not on duty." Winthrop slid down, rope in hand, to the sound of Grum's laughter. He tied a secure knot around the post recessed into the wall, trying not to tug and surprise the horse. "What's his name?" he asked. "Due Process," said Grum. Winthrop grimaced. "Sounds a bit oppressive to me. The ones we have back home, we name them things like Lightning or Strong Arm. Actually, both of those are my cousin's horses, but things like that." "So do we," said Straw, "but life doesn't always deal you a horse who deserves to be called Lightning." She reached over from her side of the cart and opened the door for Grum, whose array of machine arms hampered her movement. "What can a horse do to deserve a name like Due Process?" Winthrop asked. "I can't imagine he's made many arrests." "He used to be called Jiffy," Grum said, arranging herself at the edge of the bench. "As in, get there inner. But it soon became apparent that he didn't." She pushed herself up on both knuckles, kicked her little feet forwards, and jumped. Her wooden appendages spread against the air. She hit the ground heavily, fists first. "So," she continued, sorting herself out with only the briefest of coughs and a slight shake of her hair, "we changed it to Due Course. Because although you never quite knew with him when you'd arrive, you knew you'd get there eventually. Due course. But he even let himself down on that point a couple of times and had to be put through some rather strict retraining. Hence, Due Process." "Aw," Winthrop said, supportively, giving the horse a pat on the side. "Don't awe him," said Grum. "He's chased down more criminals than you have." "And ever will at this rate," said Straw. "Come on, team. Let's not fall at the first hurdle here. We are 7 doors down from a crime scene. Let's at least be able to say we ventured in." As they approached, the clonkers began to untie the ropes to let them through. The cordoned area consisted mostly of flat wall, with a slight overhang on the second story and a couple of windows upstairs. The only evidence of an entrance was a narrow passage that led through to the rear, which was topped with an approximation of an arch. Grum drew in her mechanism as much as she could, but it was clear she wouldn't fit through without jeopardizing some of the more fragile extremities. "I'd rather not risk it," she said. "Is there a front way?" "Further on down the road," one of the guards replied, gesturing. To be honest, Ian, I'm basically just carrying on until I go to bed, so that's at least another 20 minutes. So if you need to go, just this will be up as a video on the Patreon later. So make some sort of note. We're about an hour and 40 minutes in, a bit less. No, not less, because I was really late as usual, because everything went wrong as usual. Grum sighed, pitched a withering look at Straw, and set off. "If you're going to be a while," Straw said, "you can pass me your pen now." Grum laughed. "Don't tell me you've solved this one already just from looking at the building." "Not yet," said Straw, "but I bet it won't take as long as it will for you to struggle up the stairs with all that." "Borrow the rookies," Grum called, trudging off down the road. "He carries it with him at all times." "Good point. Winthrop, pen, please, and follow me." She set off through the passage to the back of the row, with Winthrop trotting immediately behind, failing to dig the pen out of his coat as he went. The back was very similar to the front, except the distance to the opposite row was much smaller and there wasn't a road running through it. Instead, there was a series of low walls and fences boxing off the back of each property, the first indication of where the boundaries were. Some of these contained washing lines and rain-ragged chairs, one contained a lot of wooden planks in untidy heaps. All but one of these spaces were ankle-deep in gems, mostly sapphire. The victim, on the other hand, had very little inside his section. There was a path of single-file paving slabs on the left-hand side leading from the waist-high gate up to the back door, and the rest of the space was taken up with grass. A light dusting of gem granules nestled among the blades. "Look," Straw said, "not a very thick covering of gems. Does that tell us anything?" Winthrop considered it. "How long's he been missing?" "Since last week. And we haven't had a heavy gemfall since then, have we?" "Since then, no. There was a good few hours of gemfall about a week ago, round about the time he would have disappeared, but not much after. I can only think of one light shower in that time." "Well, in that case, I'd say we can use that to roughly determine the time of death. Nearly all the other spaces back there have a fairly thick covering. Nearly all the other spaces back here have a fairly thick covering. I'm guessing the people here aren't house-proud and think of these back areas as nothing but exits and entrances. But with the very low coverage in this one space, I think we're looking at a man who likes to keep things neat and tidy. So he clears up his property after the big gemfall of a week ago, then disappears. The gems that are here must have rained down since then, when he wasn't here to tidy up." "All right, good start. Now, do you see anything else?" Winthrop scanned the property. There was a large window above them, aligned with the right-hand side, slightly overlooking the arched passage. The back door was a simple slab of wood with a lock, and seemed intact. "I'm not seeing any signs of forced entry on the window or door," Winthrop said. "Me neither. Anything else?" "Not that stands out." "All right." Straw followed the path over to the back door, examining the ground. "Here," she said, calling him over. "What do you think that is?" She was pointing to two small recesses in the earth, where gems had tumbled in to fill the space. There was nothing unusual about the gems, so Winthrop brushed them aside to look underneath. A few blades of grass uncurled, but most stayed flattened to the ground. "Something heavy," he said. "Such as?" "Don't know yet. Could be someone was kicking at the ground with their boot." "No," said Straw, with the tone of one who already knew exactly what it was. "Oh, if it was a walking stick, then the owner must have been on the heavier side." "No, think bigger." "It could have been an item of furniture. In which case its absence could be a clue. Something that sank into the ground and then was removed recently. The coverage of gems is consistent with the rest of the space, so it's been gone for as long as the man has. Although, I can't think of a garden chair that rests on just 2 feet like this." "You're closer," said Straw. She was standing with her back to the wall, looking up at the building opposite. "Can you see anything up there? That I wouldn't be able to see, I mean." He squinted. The building was fairly plain, same as the victim's, but there was one thing. "Yes. How did you know that?" "I guessed. What are you seeing?" There was a messy bird's nest built onto a piece of guttering. Probably a crow's. But there's a very faint haze coming from that nest. It's just a trace. Like it's something that used to be a bit magic, but has since stopped being. It's something small inside the nest. I guess the bird picked up someone's lucky dice or something and the spell's worn off since. Just what I was expecting you to say, but you'll need to start thinking a bit more like a detective. She strode past him and back to the arched passageway they'd come through. I knew to look up there because I'm thinking through possible scenarios. No, stay where you are, I'll only be a moment. Sorry, sir. They told me I was doing well in my training, but I'm afraid I'm baffled by all this. I admit I wasn't expecting to start hunting for clues until we got inside the crime scene. Ah, but that's the whole point. A criminal is usually quite careful about what he leaves inside a crime scene. It's when they think they've got away that they leave clues behind, and you'd be surprised how quickly they think that. Aha! Yes, just as I thought. What have you found? A scrap of clothing? A blood stain? No, come and look. She was pointing to the top of the passage, where there was a light scrape mark on the brick, very faint. What do you make of it? He squinted his smaller eyes and focused with the light-sensitive ones. It isn't a mark, it's a smear of fibres. Tiny slivers, I'd say wood. Left behind by something scraping past. The garden furniture. We're building a little story already, aren't we? See what I mean? All right, I think it's time we looked round inside. Okay. Don't worry about it, Matt. The video is going to be available if you want to catch up. But what we've got here is Detective Straw in a sort of magic world where there's gems everywhere, and her new trainee who is a scary monster. Okay, next scene. Well, not really the next scene. You know, it's the same bit, but they're going inside rather than outside. So I've separated it out with a little line break. Just gonna blow my nose again. Okay. And let's find the next section. Okay. Next section then. The inside of the victim's home consisted mostly of a single room. It was squarish and just big enough for its 2 comfy chairs, 3 little round tables arranged strategically between them, and a few standing lamps. One of these, the tallest, was unshuttered, but a large window which took up most of the right-hand wall let in enough sunlight that the creature inside the lamp's cage was out of phase, if it hadn't escaped altogether. This was the window they had been standing underneath, and Winthrop had noticed a small nod from Straw as soon as she saw it. She had clearly factored it into the story in her mind and was satisfied to see it exactly where she had expected it. The tables were covered in empty mugs, ashtrays, folded up bits of paper, and more orderly stacks and folders, with no room to put anything new down. Naturally, some of the papers sported all the signs of having had overfull cups of tea resting on them. Around one, I nearly said I said it like it was a round one, but it's the word around. Around one armchair, in particular, were several bound volumes, and one bowl containing the remnants of a breakfast. What do we have? Straw asked the clonker who turned them in. The way up was a lot more complicated than Winthrop had expected, and they needed the man's guidance through the cramped hallways and laundry rooms and unexpected outcroppings of wall to even find the correct staircase. There was a choice of 3. Straw had explained. The whole street was built, more or less, a room at a time, wherever space and funding presented itself. He imagined buildings creeping across the landscape over decades, like tree roots growing. Other than this, the clonker said, we've got a bedroom and a bathroom through the far door there. Kitchen round the corner behind us, only a small one. It'd be a cupboard if it wasn't a kitchen. We've searched them thoroughly, but, Straw agreed. She unscrewed the lid off a small bottle from inside her coat and threw a few pinches of powder around the room. She watched it land and nodded, even though it looked to Winthrop as if nothing had happened. Replacing the bottle, she next took out a small scroll, the one he'd seen Grum hand her at the station. Still haven't given me your pen, Winthrop, she said. With a small gasp of guilt, he took out his notebook and pulled the pen out from the spiral binding where he'd slotted it, tugging some of the rings out of shape in his haste. Well, look at that, said Straw, turning the pen over. How much did this set you back? It was a present. Well, the money was a present. From my uncle. I wanted to make sure I had the right equipment with me. In that case, we'll replace this with a cheap throwaway one at the earliest opportunity. That looks like a reconstituted sapphire inkwell. Inside wood from... Let me guess, Ribbon's Rest? That'll be Mirrorleaf Burwood. Winthrop could feel his cheeks turning mauve. They do make the best pens, he said. This one's by my favourite designer. You're not wrong. It's certainly a nice bit of work. They say the best design is the least design. Have you heard that? Doesn't always hold up, of course. Take this room, for instance. Not a lot of deliberate design has been applied to it, but that's not going to win any awards. Arranged for function rather than aesthetic. What do you think? I should think so, yes. I noticed the mirror on the wall there is near the door, so a man can have a look at himself as he's putting his coat on. Either a very efficient man or one who's used to having too little time. The kitchen's a bit of a mess, he said, craning his head. But nothing out of the ordinary. Plates and an overfull bin. Never mind the kitchen, said Straw. What else in here? No, not that. I'm going to change that. Because actually, not never mind the kitchen. So I've deleted that. What else in here? I had a said Straw before. I'll throw one in there just in case it's any good. What else in here, said Straw. Well, the chairs are positioned to catch the sunlight. Good for reading. I heard that. What? I heard you hesitate before you mentioned reading, and I'm ever so pleased. Say it, go on. Winthrop blushed again. Well, it's just the books. The wall opposite the window was dominated by a unit of furniture reaching from end to end, consisting of cupboards that came up to waist height with a collection of paperback books lined up at the back. Yes, what about them? They're mostly classic novels, which could simply be a preference, but several of them are duplicates, and the spines are very creased, suggesting a lot of rereading, perhaps even annotation. I'd check, but, well... Go on. Well, but he was interrupted. Yes, yes, said Grum from outside the main door, dragging herself up the last of the steps. Point taken, Winthrop. Straw is trying to point out that I forgot to tell her what the man does for a living. She has figured out that he teaches classic literature to students at the academy, which explains everything about the books. Almost everything, said Winthrop, casting a glance at Straw. Straw smiled. She was writing something on the unrolled parchment, the blank warrant, supplied by Grum. There she goes, Grum laughed. She's figured it out already. Now, what do you mean, almost everything? Well, look, said Winthrop, as Grum struggled through the door. When she saw, her eyebrows shot up. 3 of the paperbacks were sagging under the weight of a chunk of dark wood, a decorative figurine of some sort that had been placed on top of them for want of shelf space. Even allowing for extreme stylization, the thing wasn't much of a human figure, more like a lump with shapes notched into it, bringing vaguely to mind the sense of 4 protruding limbs. And it was absolutely fizzing. Why didn't you mention it before? Straw asked. Well, truth be told, I was trying to figure out what's going on with it, he said. I can see a strong magical haze on it, but I'm having a terrible time trying to identify what sort. I haven't seen a haze like it before, except on certain ancient stones and trees and the like, things that store up magic in a permanent sense without really being useful for getting any out. It would be completely useless as a magical talisman. The sort of thing they have at the market to improve luck or productivity always shows a steady leakage of magic. That's the point of them. This wouldn't have any such function. It's all locked up inside. Theories? Well, he might just have liked the look of it, of course. If that was true, said Straw, he might have cleared some space for it. No, this thing is not displayed for aesthetics. I'd say we have enough evidence in front of us to conclude that our Mr. Grum, you also appear to have neglected to tell us the man's name. Headthorn. Algis. Thank you. That our Mr. Headthorn did not intend to display this item, and I predict that in about 10 seconds' time, I will be satisfied that Mr. Headthorn didn't put it there at all, and in fact might never have seen it. How can you tell all that just from a bit of wood? Watch. She picked it up. Yep, our man's never seen this in his life. Winthrop came over to peer at the little wooden lump, while Straw turned it over to examine the side they hadn't yet seen. The item looked much the same in close-up as it had from a few paces away, except for one thing. Ah, he said. Yes, said Straw. Interesting, isn't it? The back of the item, the side that had been facing the wall, had a large split in it, as if the wood had been too dry and cracked open. But it hadn't split in any old jagged line. It was a multi-pronged thing with a certain amount of symmetry to it. It had serifs, and one curl that would have worked against the grain of any wood. But how does that tell you whether or not Mr. Headthorn's ever seen it? It doesn't. Do you know what it is? Well, I'm not much of a scientist, he said, but I've seen those shapes, yes. Vuthuker. Grum burst out laughing. That'll be what they call them in Ribbon's Rest, I expect. Well, yes. They were some of the first people to discover them. You can still find traces of the shapes in their written language today. Some people think that's why they're such good scientists, because the operation of magic is second nature to them. It's just part of how they talk and think. They're called futhux, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Vuthakur is just what it sounds like when someone from Amakeep says futhux in a daft accent. That's a bit insensitive, Winthrop said, wounded. Yes, said Grum. All right, Alemsey, said Straw, punching a final full stop into the parchment before rolling it up again. Let's not frighten him away on his first day. I believe I've got everything I need. Grum's face screwed up. You mean I've lugged all this up here for nothing? Absolutely not, Straw said. She walked over to the window, peering out, then down to the little yard below. Yes, I'm quite certain I've got a handle on what happened, but I'm still pretty hopeless on why or who did it. You can start setting up. Grum hadn't waited, and was already twisting various catches on various parts of the contraption, letting the multicoloured liquids from the bottles glug down into pipes and fill up containers on the ends of metallic arms. The whole thing heaved, in rhythm, like it was drinking. Just a sec. Okay. Just a moment. Hello again. Still on? Are we still on? Can you still hear me? Just check the stream's going. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so and do tell me if any of this makes no sense or is way too confusing for you, or if you're thinking if you're interested. Winthrop tried not to look too excited. This was the part he'd been looking forward to the most. How much do you know about the process? Straw asked him. Well, it's all been explained to me in lectures and textbooks and the like, he said. We even had a guest speaker from Navarre's Central Guard's Illusory Forensics Department. Straw gave the appropriate hum and raised eyebrows. Navarus was a bigger and more important city than Throttlenest, and much more given to telling other people how to do things. But you've only been told about it, never actually done it. Well, said Winthrop, looking everywhere else. It isn't legal, is it? Civilians can't go conjuring up visions. They can't, said Straw. I'll ask again. You've never done it anyway? No, said Winthrop. No. A third of his eyes winced. He hadn't meant to say that third no. Well then, let's fix that. Grum, you all set up? Ready. Having fed the machine, Grum had now placed a few unlit wickless candles, thank you, around the outside of the room. They were purplish black and flecked with shreds of chipped sapphire. All right, everyone who isn't IF Technician Grum or Detective Winthrop, push off, please. The clonker guard obediently backed away out of the door, crashing gently into the two clonkers who had appeared outside to try and get a look. All right then, Grum, Straw said, closing the door and gesturing for Winthrop to back away to the wall. Toes outside the perimeter, everyone, said Grum, and twisted the two main handles towards one another. Empty bottles filled, chugging bubbles, mixing the coloured potions together. Mirrors angled outwards, and Grum tweaked the arms at their bases to point the mirrors more precisely towards the candles, which, when she pulled a crank near her shoulder, all suddenly flared into life, tiny bright white lights snarling into life above them. Oh, I've got two into lifes there. I shall merely highlight that for fixing later. There we go. Their lights glimmered in each of the angled mirrors, which all began to slowly move as Grum carefully turned a handle. As they slid gradually to point to one another, the points of light caught in each seemed to travel past the reflective glass, converging with one another in a single point in the air. As it formed, the light from the candles themselves began to dim, sucked out of existence, and with their light went the natural sunlight inside their radius, until the space was almost entirely dark. Grum turned the handle a little more, finding the perfect spot, sharpening the point of light, which now hovered just in front of her, all the fingers of her mechanism pointing in towards it. There was a tearing sound as the last of the candlelight was sucked away, and suddenly the room was back. Except now there was a middle-aged man sitting in one of the armchairs. It does look quite real, doesn't it? Said Winthrop, looking him over. The man, who didn't look particularly see-through or hazy as he had expected, was not especially overweight for his age and troubled by fewer wrinkles than you saw on humans who worked outside in the sun. his brow and jaw being the most affected. His hair was thinning, but not gone, and he was sitting reading a book with a smile on his face. Straw laughed. Looks jolly, doesn't he? He fits the description of the missing man, such that it is mid-40s. Is he anyone you know? Not personally, although I do recognise him a bit. I've been to Throstle Academy a few times. I'm sure I've seen him about. Can I quiz him? Asked Grum eagerly. Go on, then. Winthrop? Yes? There are two things interesting about Mr. Headthorne here. What can you see? Well, I've no idea what book he's reading, of course. It was one of his paperbacks, but the title was jumbled and difficult to focus on. The letters looked like letters. Well, no, they didn't, but they felt like letters if you didn't concentrate on what they actually looked like. But when you blinked or looked away or tried to concentrate, they changed into something else. Correct, but that's true of any vision. It doesn't tell us anything about what happened to this bloke. What else? Not much. He looks pretty normal to me. Why do we conjure visions? Grum asked, sharing a look with Straw, which Straw appeared to quite kindly brush off. Well, said Winthrop, in any criminal investigation, the important thing is to ascertain exactly what happened at the scene of the crime. Who was there? Who did what? Yes, and... She was urging him towards saying something specific, but he wasn't sure what. And so, he tried, given that we now have the technology to look into the past and see it for ourselves, that's an important tool on the modern detective's belt. We conjure a vision of the moment the crime took place and we... Well, you know. Yes, I do. You tell me, though. Well, we have a poke about and find out what happened. No! What? We don't find out what happened, do we? Oh, Winthrop said, feeling a bit embarrassed. No, I suppose we don't. I meant in an ideal world, though. We don't live in an ideal world, Winthrop. That's the point of our job. Try again. We conjure a vision of the moment the crime took place and we... Well, we look at what we find and we sort of rule it out. Straw laughed again. Basically, yeah. Of course, if it could be as easy as casting a spell to find out who was responsible for a crime, police work would be very easy. Nobody would bother committing any crimes at all, because they'd be found out without any trouble. Perhaps it had been that easy once. Maybe there had been a wonderful few months when the police had cleared their whole backlog, new and old. But it can't have taken long before the criminal element started to cast their own spells. What we're seeing is what someone wants us to see, he said. Straw nodded, which was promising. Assuming this is the moment a crime took place, and assuming its perpetrator had the time and resources to hire a vision mage, which they almost always do, said Straw, scribbling something onto the parchment, then what we're looking at is a fictitious version of what happened, designed to protect the guilty. And I'm pretty certain that's the case, said Grum. Straw's noticed it. Winthrop said, straining. Little details, said Straw. What's he doing? He's reading? Oh, he's smiling! Exactly, said Grum. I don't care how much you love the classics, nobody sits reading a book to themselves and smiling like that. Not without rests in between. But why is it a clue? Winthrop asked. Because someone's trying to convince us this is a picture of an ordinary merry day for Mr. Headthorne, said Grum. He's a literature teacher, so they have him sitting grinning away, reading some literature. It's way too obvious, no imagination at all. The book's another giveaway. There's nothing on the cover to indicate what book it is other than the title, which we can't read. So they might not even have taken the trouble to think of a particular book. This was hastily put together. Let's stop torturing him, Lemsey, Straw interjected. He was right to notice the book. You can never read the title of a book in a vision, but the way those letters change whenever you stop concentrating on them, that's pure vision, Mage. That's a good clue. That this isn't what really happened. Plus, incidentally, notice there's only enough text for a title. Where's the author's name? Oh, good point, said Winthrop. So, we're not fooled, now what? But he was interrupted by Mr. Headthorne closing his book, getting up out of his chair, and walking out through the front door. They watched him head down the stairs until the door closed. Straw, who'd been poised for this, immediately threw open the real door and presented the empty stairwell to Winthrop with a flourish. Oh, that's good, he said. If we'd have followed him, he'd have kept walking until we lost sight of him some other way, said Grum. And you always lose sight of them. So the guilty party wants us to think that Headthorne was having a perfectly ordinary day, said Winthrop. And he walked out of the house and was never seen again, like in your theory about the illicit lover. Oh, I've abandoned that now, said Straw. I know exactly what happened to him. It's all down on here, she said, holding up the rolled-up parchment. But ignore that for now. Once we've got a vision up, what do we look for? Aberrations, said Winthrop straight away. This was comfortable territory. Now, he'd talked his way through the process countless times. Places where parts of the Vision Mage's subconscious leak through into the vision. The books would be a good place to start. Good, said Straw. Can you see anything? The books on the shelf. Okay. The books on the shelf looked about the same as they had in real life. A few scattered about here and there, a couple of stacks and minor heaps, and a line of upright paperbacks along the back wall, presumably Headthorn's best, or at least his first, with that wooden statue thing sitting on top. But now the titles couldn't be read, of course. Nothing standing out, but let's see. He picked up one of the books, one of the loose ones, not one of the neatly arranged ones. He didn't want to upset the statue. He opened the book on a random page, then another, glancing at them, flicking through. Anything? Asked Straw. No. The trick, or so he'd been taught, was to ignore what you were actually seeing with your eyes and pay attention to the words that felt most comfortable in your head. If you picked up anything from looking at text in a vision, it was probably stray thoughts from the Vision Mage who cast it, but he wasn't getting anything much. He threw the book over to Straw, who didn't seem to get much further. Just a vague sense of enjoying the taste of cherry batch. Oh, this is Straw. Just a vague sense of enjoying the taste of cherry batch, she said, presumably part of the mage's payment. But hang on. Oh, and by the way, cherry batch. I haven't made any mention of. I'm trying to note down like details about the world that I've come up with. Haven't written anything down about cherry batch. I imagine I was talking about a kind of alcohol or something. Cherry batch. Mr. Headthorn. Oh no, sorry. Mr. Headthorn's Vision Mage liked it. Liked the taste. No, Mr. Headthorn's Vision Mage isn't right. The Vision Mage who covered up the Headthorn crime scene liked the taste. There we go, that'll do. Because I mentioned cherry wine later on, so I might as well change it to cherry batch. Unless I was there, I suppose batch is that's a way of describing bread, so maybe it's a kind of cherry bread. Yeah. Ooh, that sounds nice. Cherry bread. Ooh, what does that mean? Yum. Anyway. But hang on, said Winthrop. Straw perked up. Yes. Well, I'm thinking these books. He's got it, Straw said, looking excited. These books? Well, it's just, why are they here? If I was a criminal and I was setting up a false vision, I'd be trying to minimise the chance of aberrations. I'd take all the books away before I left the area, and have the mage take them out of the vision as well. That way there'd be one less chance of the likes of us picking up clues. Wouldn't there? Quite right, said Straw. You didn't quite get it. Better luck next time, but you're well on the way. Couldn't ask for a track more right than the one you're on at the moment. So, you're right, and if our perp happened to be too rattled to think of it, you can bet the Vision Mage would have suggested it. So why didn't they remove the books? He couldn't. Oh, I should put they couldn't. They couldn't. Correct. Why? And I'll spoil it, and I'll tell you that in this particular case, there are 2 reasons. Oh, well, maybe they were in too much of a hurry to get away. From who? The man lives on his own. A wallop on the head for him, or worse, and there'd have been plenty of time. Why? Winthrop rolled the words around. Couldn't they remove the books? I don't know. I mean, even if they had been short on time, they could have just thrown them out the window. Which is? Said Straw. What? The window, where is it? It's there, he pointed. Oh, I see what you mean. We haven't seen evidence of a particular crime, have we? Someone set up a false vision in here, but all we actually know from that for certain is that a vision mage got a good look at this room, and they could well have done that through the window, in which case they couldn't remove the books because they were never in the room. Exactly. Look, it covers the whole wall. A vision mage could see everything they needed to see to get the vision right. Yeah, but then again, we are on the upstairs floor. How would the vision mage see in? Straw beckoned him over. She opened the window and had him lean out. Look down, she said. And there were the notches in the grass, directly below. The garden chair. You're making up that it was a chair. We know it's wooden. It's heavy enough to drive 2 little trenches into the grass where it rested. It's big enough that it dragged along the wall when someone saw fit to carry it through the entry passage recently, i.e. just before Mr. Headthorn's disappearance, or just since, or in my opinion, both. What are we looking at, Winthrop? He realised something. 17 of his eyes widened. A ladder. They brought it round the back, set it up against this wall, and had the vision mage climb up and look over the whole room. Had you figured all of that out downstairs? Yep, said Straw, and And once you've got one detail like that sorted out, a few more start clicking into place. You start to know what to look for. Such as? Well, we've already established we are looking at a false vision, which means we almost certainly are investigating a crime. Any criminal who wanted a vision mage to memorize this room would find it far easier just to break in through the back door and take the mage up the same way we went, but they chose instead to go to all the bother of bringing a ladder and convincing the mage to climb up to the window. No easy task in itself. Vision mages are never big on physical exertion, so why? Why go to all the trouble? To slow us down? Winthrop guessed. The perpetrator wanted there to be no physical or psychic evidence of the vision mage's presence in the room that we could easily track. Exactly. But most criminals just clean the place up to achieve the same effect. Surfaces can be wiped down, magical traces can be expunged, but the guilty party in this case didn't want to bother with that, which tells us something very important. Have you got it yet? Not yet, Winthrop confessed. It means that in all likelihood, the perpetrator has never set foot inside the place either. I'm comfortable ruling out Mr. Headthorne himself as a suspect. Self-inflicted disappearances are less rare than you like, but when they happen, they're usually quiet and small and don't involve ladders. So this was done by someone else, but done from a distance. We are looking at a spell, cast remotely, not a home invasion. So, said Winthrop, someone vanished Mr. Headthorne remotely, without ever entering the house, then sent a vision mage up the ladder to look through his window at the room he was last in so that they could accurately recreate it for the vision. Looks like. There's one problem, though. There's several. Which one do you mean? The wooden talisman. You already decided Mr. Headthorne had never seen it before, but the vision includes it, as if it was there when he was. That means they probably want us to believe it was there the whole time. Are we assuming it was a key ingredient in the spell, and if so, when was it put in his home? And who by? And how come he never noticed it? Well, answer those backwards, said Straw. He might not have noticed it simply because it didn't draw his attention. The place is hardly tidy, is it? As for who put it there, well, that's the big question, but it's someone I'd like to talk to. And when? I would estimate the same day the ladder was set up. That's very specific, said Winthrop. What's that based on? If you can figure that out, Straw said, I'll know you're starting to think like a detective. Is there anything you can see that you haven't mentioned yet? He cast around the room. Not much. Incidentally, said Grum, what do visions look like to Elegasts? Flat and lifeless, said Winthrop. You? Grum looked offended. This is the best vision you're ever likely to see. Thanks very much, flat and lifeless. It looked exactly true to real life. Ah, said Winthrop, in that case I think I know what's going on. Vision casting was developed with the human eye in mind. I see real life with a bit of a wider gamut than you do, an extra spectrum here and there. I suppose what I'm seeing now is what the world looks like to a human. Or to a... He gestured feebly at Grum. Makes sense, she grumped. Right, I'm getting restless, said Straw. Look over there on the wall. He looked. Behind a smaller lamp set on top of the wall unit, a bit of wallpaper showed through, featuring a wavy pattern. All right, he said. What? Now look at that bit. Elsewhere, over near the front door, the wallpaper reached from floor to ceiling, obscured only by a coat stand, but the pattern was different. It was still quite wavy, but with circular bits and bits that looked like leaves. He looked back, and the first pattern had now been replaced by the second. Aha! An aberration! That's right, blink a few times and it'll jump in and out. And that's the last clue we need. I happen to know exactly where that aberrant pattern comes from, so I know who we need to talk to next. Lyssa Cadrisham. Oh, no, Grum moaned. That's all, thank you, Alemsey. Leave the candles here, said Straw. It'll save us having to come back. Grum abruptly let go of the handles of her contraption. The mirrors suddenly sprang apart, every wooden arm and metal pipe spreading wide around her. Her fists pressed against the floor and her toes seemed to grip, and she jerked backwards slightly, as if anyone else would have been sent staggering. There was a feeling like the air in his head going inside out and hissing out of his ears. The vision was gone. The room was back to normal, all of his eyes seeing it again now in every spectrum, even the subtle ones that tend to get drowned out. It was a bit much, like stepping out of darkness into blazing sunlight. He blinked heavily and rubbed several of his eyes. You'll get used to it, said Straw. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you before we go. Follow me. Okay, we are nearing the end of the bit I'm going to read you today. Let's just check. Well, quite, Matt, exactly, yeah. Check I'm still broadcasting. Looks like I am. Jolly good. Quite an unexpected number of people still watching. Thanks to everyone who can still hear me. Do remember that I'm accepting any and all commentary, positive and negative, at such a time as befits you. I don't mean befits. You know what I mean. Suits. All right, let's just press straight on so I can go to bed soon. Oh, actually, just before I do, hang on. Okay. Come on, Straw called. She swung open the neighbour's gate, the one that shared a fence with Mr. Headthorn's little yard. Here, the gemfall was still thick on the ground. The new kid was coming out through Mr. Headthorn's back door, ducking to fit his long head under the doorframe. They usually carried themselves so proudly she hadn't seen an Elagast look nervous before, or excited. She'd never seen one not fit in. Come to that, she hadn't seen one that wasn't already fitted in. You usually saw them in certain establishments, Elagast inns or Elagast food shops, both of which humans tended to avoid in case they saw anything uncomfortable. Sometimes you saw them on the other side of a street. You tended to be on the other side of a street to Elagasts. I don't understand, he was saying. How do you know there's something there you want to show me? We didn't look in there. You hadn't done this crime scene already, had you? I'm trying to prove a point, Straw replied. Anyone can look around and write down what they find. We're here to think like detectives. By the way, I'm not a little bit concerned that I keep saying that, because I'm sure it's going to turn out that I've thought like a massive idiot and not, there'll be loads of loose ends and it won't make sense. And as such, I know exactly what I'm going to find here. Winthrop's tiny eyelids were blinking in sequence across his face. It looked like black sailcloth rippling in the wind. We're building a story, Winthrop, she said. What's the story so far? Right. Something happened to Mr. Headthorn, he said. We don't know what, but it happened, and now he's gone. Somehow, after his disappearance, a wooden statue was placed on the books he kept opposite the window. At some point, a ladder was brought through that passageway there. Not at some point, said Straw. It was on the same day as the statue appeared. All right, but you haven't said how we know that yet. So, on the same day, a ladder was brought around and set up against the building there, and a vision mage went up it and looked in through Mr. Headthorn's window. Having absorbed the details of the room, the mage then set up a false vision which tries to imply that Mr. Headthorn simply left the house of his own accord on an ordinary day, and that the wooden talisman was there already. You missed something. Did I? Yes, one of the first details we noticed, and which has to go right at the start of the story. She gestured down at Winthrop's feet, where the coverage of gems was very slight. Oh, yes, he said. Mr. Headthorn had harvested all the gems on his property just before his disappearance. Why, what do you make of that? On the way in, Straw said, we thought it told us he was an exceptionally tidy man. But one look at his living room tells you otherwise. So, what if he isn't the one who tidied up his yard? What if the perpetrator did, to hide a key piece of evidence? All right, Winthrop agreed. Like what? We already agreed there was a heavy gemfall around the time just before Mr. Headthorn disappeared. And only a light shower since, which accounts for the dusting of sapphire on his property. Now, we don't know exactly what happened to Mr. Headthorn, although I think you're thinking the same as I am. Yeah, said Winthrop. So we want a theory as to how it was done. Well, here's mine. Remember that crow's nest? Winthrop glanced upwards again. The nest in the guttering was letting off its gentle magical haze. Oh, he said. See where it is? Said Straw. Oh, said Winthrop. Yes. It was directly opposite Mr. Headthorn's big window. You think the nest was placed there, laced with magic of some sort, to spy on Mr. Headthorn? I've seen it, time and again, Straw said. I'd be willing to bet that if we went up and looked, we'd find a dead crow in there with its eye pointed straight at the window. There are more elaborate ways of setting up remote vision. I've seen roving clouds, I've seen bricks in walls rigged with tiny eyes, all sorts. But they take a high level of skill and the right kind of gems overhead for it to work. Not practical for a small-time criminal. You know you're looking at a major operation when you find something like that. But a crow's eye misses very little when it's alive, so it doesn't take much to get it going again after the crow's dead. Just the slightest suggestion it might as well keep doing something it's always done effortlessly. They can be turned into watching devices relatively easily by anyone with a decent handle on enchantments, and those people become incredibly easy to find if you have criminal connections. So, said Winthrop, now we want to know why someone wanted to spy on Mr. Headthorn and why they'd want him out of the way. Actually, I don't think they were spying on him. I think they were keeping an eye on the sunlight outside his window. Realization dawned. So this is about the heavy gemfall a week ago, Winthrop said. Someone had been wanting to trigger a quite strong spell, which requires particular light conditions to work. The usual bluish light coming through sapphire wouldn't do it. You think something else other than sapphire rained down that day? That's right, said Straw. Hold this for me. She passed him the rolled-up parchment. I suspect, she said, that if I have a little dig around here... She crouched in the neighbour's yard, pushing handfuls of sapphire aside, and there it was, exactly as she'd expected. "Here," she shouted, cueing Winthrop to come over and see. Underneath layers of sapphire, barely visible in amongst all that blue, were a few stray gems of a slightly different colour, a shade more indigo, only noticeable if you were looking for it. "Lightning tanzanite," Winthrop said, peering closely at it with a little smile on his face. "Exactly right," Straw said, impressed. To the human eye, very similar to sapphire, but a completely different stone, with a completely different set of characteristics. If there'd been even a moderate amount of this stuff floating around up there when it started to rain, there'd be more than enough sunlight sparkling off the falling granules to make some quite potent spells possible, such as transformation spells. Exactly. Go on, unroll the warrant, read it back to me. Winthrop grinned, which Straw took to mean Bodmin had already signed it, back at the station. "The High Throne of Amakeep, Weirvale, and the Phantom Orchards does hereby grant warrant," Winthrop read, "to the interrogation and apprehension of suspect or suspects listed below, Lyssa Cadrisham, known Vision Mage, on the matter of the following suspected—" "Yes, all right," Straw interrupted. "I mean, read what I've put." She had unhooked the nozzle of the personal harvester inside her coat, and now she aimed it at the ground and ran her finger along the reactive strip. The pipe jolted, and granules started to leap up, sucked into the nozzle. They rattled as they filled up the pockets, stitched into the lining. "Oh, sorry," said Winthrop, and began to read. "On or after the 25th Trimmen, suspect climbed a ladder placed at the back of the property of Mr. Algis Headthorne of 6819 Mousetail Run, and observed the interior of the property through the large upstairs window in order to place there a false vision obscuring the truth of Mr. Headthorne's disappearance. A watching device placed opposite the property in a bird's nest appears to have been used to spot granules of lightning tanzanite in localized gemfall, triggering a remote spell by which the victim appears to have been... I thought so, you know. Appears to have been transformed into a chunk of dense wood, since seized as evidence." "That all sounds right," Winthrop said. "But there's one thing you haven't explained. Now I know why Mr. Headthorne had never seen that statue. It's because he is the statue. What I don't get is, how did you know that just from picking it up? Was it the symbol on the figure?" "No, we don't know what the symbols actually mean. They just occur." "All right, so if it wasn't that, then it must be something about how magic works that you haven't told me yet?" No. Much easier than that. Nothing I know that you don't. Nothing you couldn't work out for yourself." "Huh. Keep thinking about it," said Straw, "while we go and see Lyssa Cadrisham." Yes, okay, there's a note to myself there. Still going? Still streaming? I promise we are coming towards the end of this little story. We're going to be having another little story just before we get to the end of it, but I hope you'll find it interesting. We'll see. In other words, I'm hoping to be in bed by, 20 minutes, not long. Anyway, let's see. "I don't know nothing about no teacher," Lyssa Cadrisham yelped, backing into the smoke-stained wall. "But I know you're not allowed to do this." "I didn't realise you were so interested in what is and isn't allowed," said Straw. "In that case, I'm sure you'll be dying to help us with our inquiries. What happened to Mr. Headthorne definitely isn't allowed. My colleague here is the new guy on my team, and it's good for him to meet helpful people with a healthy respect for the law. Why not introduce yourself, new guy?" Winthrop took another step towards the Vision Mage. "No!" Cadrisham wailed, pressing himself against the wall. "This is not acceptable treatment, and you know it! This is intimidation!" "Oh, give over," said Straw, waving at Winthrop to back down. "I seem to recall you had nothing against intimidation when I was last here, and you happened to have your biggest crawling mates over." "Were you scared?" Cadrisham demanded, wheezing. "No, I was not." "Well then, not intimidation, was it?" He dropped his spindly form back down into the wooden chair he'd started in, flicking a few sweat-glued strands of hair off his face. "You know what that was?" he said, to Winthrop this time, swigging from a pitcher of beer. "That was exploitation. Straight away they've got you waving your arms, trying to scare people. I saw that thing you did with your eyes, just because they've told you humans are scared of it." "When?" said Winthrop. "When you made your stripes, your patches bulged like that. The Elagast face thing. They made you do that just because people of a less culturally sensitive nature than myself They made you do that just because people of a less culturally sensitive nature than myself have been known to see it as antagonistic threat behaviour." "I was just trying to see better," said Winthrop. "It's dark in here." "Exactly what Detective Straw was counting on when she had you stand there looking all threatening. Don't let them reduce you to a stereotype," said Cadrisham. "It's demeaning to your people." It was a bit, but Winthrop had expected to have to use his appearance in the pursuit of an investigation now and then. He was hoping to make those occasions fewer as he lasted longer on the job. "Had the same conversation with those Kraylings, did you?" "Oh, I said Kralings a minute ago. It's Krah lings, and I haven't decided which way to pronounce it." Or even if that's going to be the name. Had the same conversation with those Crawlings, did you? Said Straw. That is different. Those are acquaintances of mine who have a vested interest in my protection. Look, what's this about, Detective? What are we looking at? We're looking at you telling me which of your vested friends hired you to cover up the incident of 1 week ago in which Mr. Headthorne of Throttle Academy was transformed into a lump of wood, said Straw. Is that as far as you've got? You know I won't give away a client without a bit more than that, Detective. Straw sighed. Right. She opened the front door of Cadrisham's hovel. Grum, you're up. Oh! Outside, Grum was not standing by the cart where Straw had asked her to wait. But that was ordinary, and exactly what Straw had told Winthrop to expect. What she perhaps hadn't expected was to see Chief Bodmin clambering out of a cart parked obstructively in the road, which was his prerogative, of course, and waving cheerfully to them. Winthrop, with me. Stay here, she said to Cadrisham, glaring. Well, it's a relief to see you, Bodmin said once the door had closed behind her. Trouble at the station? She asked. Could say that. I've had Greelsey in, asking about numbers. How many thieves have we sent to the vaults this month? How many violent criminals? My guess is the higher-ups have some exciting new plan about how policing works and are breathing down his neck. You know what? Forget it. I came out to get away from him. You met Greelsey yet, Winthrop? Only once, at induction. Is he the thin man with the long nose? He'd met him briefly, while he was waiting to be called in to see Bodmin for the first time. Mr. Greelsey had shaken Winthrop's hand without flinching, welcomed him to the force, and had been perfectly polite. But even still, Winthrop found him quite icy and off-putting. That's him. Then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, any progress? Well, said Straw, not yet. He's doing the Protecting Client Privilege Act, and he got it into his head that I was trying to scare him by bringing Winthrop along. Wasn't working, eh? Well, it was, but he does have a point. I'd rather not resort to intimidation if I can help it. Sounds like it's all he'll respond to, said Bodmin, shoving his way into the Vision Mage's home. Bodmin, Straw began, but he'd already started. Hello, Lissa, he said, in a voice full of teeth and neck veins. It worked immediately. Lissa stiffened in his chair, and all the colour, what little there was, drained from his face. Yes, you remember me, don't you? I came here as soon as I read the warrant application. My detective thinks you know what happened to a teacher on Mousetail Run who's been the victim of a physicality compromise. Would you have anything to say about that? Now, listen, Chief, Lissa said, nervously rising from his chair and setting down the pitcher. I didn't say I wouldn't help. I never said that. I was only reminding the detective of the importance of protecting client privilege, said Bodmin. I know that one. It's an old one. It's a tradition, yes. Look, I'd like to think the reason the clunkers are lenient on Vision Mages is because they respect the fact that we never asked to be born this way. But let's not kid ourselves. It's because we're a valuable resource to you, and I can't be a resource if I scare off any future clients by getting a reputation for blabbing without due reason. I'm sure we can arrange a good reason, said Bodmin, rolling up his sleeve. There's one standing right here, Straw interrupted quickly. Grum, set up. If he won't tell us anything, then you'll have to puff him. Bodmin rolled his sleeve back down and shot a communicative look at Cadrisham. What do you reckon to that, Lissa? Would that be convenient? I'll sign the warrant right now. Winthrop had seen the technique used once during his training. A Vision Mage submitted to one of the strongest settings on a puffer's equipment was a wretched sight, squirming and crying out, not so much in response to the sensation as to the fear of what was to come as a result. Every vision they had ever cast, indeed every currently open spell they had laid, burst in the blink of an eye, and the wrath of everyone who had paid to have those visions in place, each of them terrified of the chaos to follow as all their work suddenly became very visible to the police. If rumour was correct, the main reason the process was rarely used was because of how much work it would mean for the police afterwards. "All right!" cried Cadrisham, staggering over to the side of the room where a wall-mounted cabinet nestled among shelves of bowls and jars. "All right, I'll tell you. Here!" He traced out a symbol on the cabinet with a finger, and it sprung open, revealing rows of small glass spheres set into dark stone bases. Inside each, a flame burned, suspended in the centre, each a slightly different colour. "Here," he said, lifting one out and checking the inscription on the base. "It's this one." He tossed it to Winthrop. "Set up, Grum." "In here?" Lissa was aghast. Grum started arranging the darker candles in a wide ring on Cadrisham's floor. "Tell me a good story and I might change my mind," said Straw. Who's your client? He's called Nevin Arlin, said Caversham hurriedly, gathering up as many of his belongings as he could from the general vicinity of Grum's candles and moving them over to the table at the far end of the room. Technically he's with the Taipans, but this time he was working alone. Alone? Straw pressed. What makes you think that? Well, have you ever heard of him before? I doubt he's a much standing in the gang. In fact, I suspect he's only in because he's in debt to someone further up the ladder that he's been having trouble paying off. Now, do you see I've got a continuity error there? Have you ever heard of him before? Whereas earlier in the story, we've had that you've never heard the names of any of them. So let me just note that down. I mean, technically it might not be a continuity error because, like, the police may have found out the names rather than them just, like, allowing the names to get out, but it's worth attention, so. But let's ignore it for now. Well, have you ever heard of him before? I doubt he's a much standing in the gang. In fact, I suspect he's only in because he's in debt to someone further up the ladder that he's been having trouble paying off. That's how they get them in to begin with, as I understand it. Never mind what you understand, said Bodmin. I'd like to hear a lot less about what you think and more about what our Nevin Arlin was thinking. Did he mention anything to you, said Straw, that could help us to understand why this attack happened? Same reason they all do, said Caversham. Everyone's in debt to someone, and everyone has a deadline looming over them. Mr. Arlin didn't say a lot, but I got the impression Mr. Headthorne owed him a certain amount, and interest being what it is, that amount was climbing at a rate that was increasingly unlikely to be paid back. So he collected on the debt. Extraction of life essence by force. Seems so, doesn't it? That statue he had on his shelves didn't exactly look carefully displayed, did it? Now look, I wasn't there for the spell. I wasn't. But from what I saw, my guess is a remote spell extracted a great deal of Mr. Headthorne's personal vitality in one big rush. I have seen it before. They reduce into a smaller, denser form of matter, a lump of rock or dead wood or something elemental like that, something that doesn't need much ongoing life energy. And of course there's a certain randomization to where the item lands. I bet they were trying for a shelf. And instead it ended up on those books. Like I said, this Mr. Arlin, he didn't seem very competent. What about the timing? Sense I got was that the timing wasn't Arlin's to decide. That meshes with my theory, Straw said to Bodmin. Are you waiting for me there, Abby?
I can do the thing though if you want.
Okay, in a moment. Yep, Bodmin said. Remote trigger set off by an unexpected fall of lightning tanzanite. Bet you any money Arlin was in trouble for that magic essence himself. And he would have got it sooner if he'd had the tanzanite to throw around. Speaking of, you did harvest it, didn't you? Got it right here, said Straw, patting her coat. Should do for a restock of the potion cupboard. All set up, Grum? I'd say so, said Grum, finishing her circle of candles. Straw reached down and lifted some of them off a rug, one of the last things of Cadrisham's still inside the circle. She folded the rug back until it was clear of the candles. He's been good. Let's spare him this stuff. Up to you, said Grum, shifting a small cooking stove and cauldron out of the way to Cadrisham's visible relief. If it was me, I'd widen it to encircle the old place. Thank you, said Cadrisham. But Winthrop had seen something he perhaps hadn't considered. The rug had a distinct pattern of wavy lines, the pattern he'd seen in the vision at Mr. Headthorne's place. This was where the pattern found its way into Cadrisham's subconscious to later appear as aberrations in his work. No wonder Straw knew where to go and wanted it kept safe. Winthrop, said Straw, smash it. He crushed the glass sphere between his gloved palms. The flame that kept the false vision alive went out with a pop and a hiss. Clear, Grum warned. Everyone stepped back. Grum twisted the handles, and the light was sucked out of the room. Let's see what really happened, Straw said. Suddenly there was Mr. Headthorne's living room again, as clear as it had been before, but this time with a visible sharpening of the edge of the space appearing as it did in only part of the room they were in, but providing the only light. It was like floating in space, looking at the world through a window. Headthorne was fast asleep. There was a rushing, clattering sound, gemfall outside his window. Then, there it was, a flash, silvery white, a split second of scrambling and clutching, and then Headthorne was gone, and the statue was there, perched on top of the books. For a split second it seemed to be about to topple, then it dropped into an upright position. No sign of Nevin Arlin, Winthrop remarked. Oh, too much to hope for, said Straw, but Lissa's testimony is enough to warrant his arrest, and even if it wasn't, it's certainly enough for Grum to threaten to pull the plug on all his currently active visions, and at the first sniff of that, His bosses in the Taipans would practically throw him at us. Thank you, Grum. That'll be enough. Let's shut it down and go easy. Grum laughed and eased the handles of her contraption apart. Straw screwed up her face and put one foot behind the other. There was a deep popping sound, one that you felt underneath your skin, as if it was tugging at it from the inside. Then a sudden burst of force threw Winthrop backwards into a wall. Straw kept her balance, but her coat flew out behind her, rattling loudly. The candles toppled. Inside the circle, the floor was black and singed, with little sparks burning here and there. Cadrishan glanced up at the ceiling. It was blackened and ragged, but seemed to have remained intact. Just one of the many reasons visions can only be drawn out by trained professionals, Straw said to Winthrop. It isn't always practical to revisit the scene when you want to re-examine a vision, and pulling them up elsewhere can have quite an effect. We try and limit it to when we're visiting vision mages, said Grum. Don't we, Lissa? See you again soon, Lissa, Straw said, heading for the door. Bodmin took a moment to glare threateningly at the vision mage before following him. It appeared Lissa Cadrishan was someone they knew well. Okay, we're right near the end now. On to the very last scene that I'm going to read you today. But first, I just need to sort the bed out so that Abby can go to it if she wants to do that. So I'm just going to mute my microphone. The picture's going to stay up, and I'll be back in like a minute, 30 seconds, something like that, to read you the final bit and the last details of the case. See you in a sec. In fact, why not? Why don't we have the go to the toilet song? I'm not going to the toilet, but we'll have the song anyway. See you soon. Right, well, I'm just going to go to the toilet, and then I'll be back, okay? Go to the toilet, 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 go to the toilet. I'm on the last bit. Let's just get it done. Here we go. Last bit. Ready? Ready, 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 ready? Ready, ready, ready? Last scene. Is my microphone on? It appears so to be. I assume I'm streaming because you're all referring to the Go to the Toilet song. So here we go. Winthrop waited in the car. while Straw talked to the chief. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but from what he understood of human body language, she was telling him she would have been perfectly able to deal with Lyssa Cadrishan without anyone having to make any physical threats. He frowned. He was trying to work something out. "Don't worry about them," said Grum, reaching up to give due process a sugar lump from somewhere inside her jumper. "That's just what it looks like when two clonkers work together for as long as they've worked together. Straw's not usually the sort to grouse at her colleagues. You'll be safe." She took out another sugar lump and popped it into due process's mouth, then clambered up to her backward-facing seat. "More where that came from," she told the horse, reaching over to give him a friendly scratch. After a moment, she turned and... I haven't got enough drink for this. Let me get myself a drink. Hang on. This is going to put a damper on the reading. I've gone and breathed a little bit of water. We need to evolve a way of dealing with that. Right. She took out another sugar lump and popped it into due process's mouth, then clambered up to her backward-facing seat. "More where that came from," she told the horse, reaching over to give him a friendly scratch. After a moment, she turned and stared at Winthrop, questioningly. "What?" she said. Winthrop dropped the frown. He'd thought a non-Elagast wouldn't be able to recognise it. "There's something she never explained about the case," he said. "Is there? Oh, that'll annoy her. She thought she was giving a comprehensive lecture. Settle down, Jew." Winthrop suddenly noticed that Grum wasn't scratching the horse with her hand, but with three of her contraption's arms, which she'd stretched out just as naturally as if they'd been arms of her own. He'd already started to think of it as an extension of her body, perhaps because her actual body occupied so little space within it. "That's clever," he said. "Are you aware you're doing it?" "What?" Grum looked around her for clues, before finally spotting what he was looking at. "Oh, I suppose I'm not. This was built for me, you know, personally. I had to get fitted for it, and the measurements had to be very accurate. Tape measures, directed light beams, and 3 craftsmen who I suspect hadn't meant for me to strip down quite that far. Best afternoon's entertainment I've ever been paid for." Detective Straw was hauling herself up into the driver's seat. "What are you two nattering about?" "Memorable days on the job, Detective," said Winthrop. "I'm sure you've had a few." "Nah." She pushed the steering bar, and to the side of her, due process's rigging pulled forwards, making him stumble and begin to trot. "So what do you think, Winthrop? Are you up to the job?" "I think so. But there's one detail that stumped me." "Was it the crow?" It was dead, you see, but its eye had been enchanted to register certain frequencies of light, specifically those given off when sunlight shines through tanzanite. The gems fell, the eye reacted, and it triggered a spell that Nevin Arlin had set up beforehand as a means of extracting life essence from Mr. Headthorne. I'm afraid there's no safe way of reversing the effect." "It wasn't that," said Winthrop. "It was what the wooden lump it turned him into." It didn't have to be wood. Could have been rock or glass or malleite, anything that doesn't need life running through it to continue to exist. That I understood. And it isn't the rune either. We Elagasts don't know anything more about what they mean than humans do, just that they're a telltale sign that something has been affected by magic. But here's my question. Go on. Before we'd proved that the talisman was Mr. Headthorne, you said you could tell at least that he had never seen it before. How could you have known that? I feel like if I could work that out, I could have solved the case myself, but it's the one part that's got me stumped. Ah, yes, it's actually very simple. You'd see it if you stopped trying to be clever about it. He looked out of the cart to watch the buildings sail past on either side of Mousetail Run. He hoped it would help clear his mind, but it wasn't doing much good. "It has to be because you'd already worked out that the talisman was Mr. Headthorne," he said out loud. "And yes, I had my suspicions, but you knew. You said you knew. So you must already have deduced it properly, proved it to yourself. But how? I've been thinking about it, and you definitely seem to think you'd proven it before you ever saw the Futhock on the back. Was it something about the colour of the wood? No, again, you're trying too hard, said Straw. You're concentrating on magic too much. You're trying to figure out what obscure spell you didn't consider. The answers are usually found in between all that stuff. Let me give you an example. She patted a little rhythm into Due Process's side and said sharply, "Home!" The horse shook its head for a moment, then surged forwards with a sudden sense that he knew where he was headed. About a year ago, said Straw, we got word of an extremely gruesome scene at the mill, which is a big old building deep in the shutter stacks, a huge block of ancient brick covered in little barred windows and not many visible exits. It purports to be a laundry house. We were told there was blood everywhere, all over the walls of one room. Told because the owner wouldn't let us in, citing the warranty laws with, frankly, expert intricacy. We do have to follow those, though, don't we? Said Winthrop. We do, and you mustn't ever let me catch you pursuing a vision mage until you've put in the proper warrant request. But when it comes to investigating premises, the people of Throstlenest have something of an understanding with the police force, namely that we're never going to try and enter your premises unless we already have a very good reason, at which point a refusal to let us in tends not to end well. A room covered in blood sounds like a pretty good reason, doesn't it? I'd say so, yes. And I did, to the owner. In the end, he relented, but insisted on guiding us directly to the room in question. And what's more, before we left, he gave his dog a peculiarly phrased command to guard the shop, which caused the dog to bark in what I am still convinced was a very particular way. 2 loud, quick barks, a low howl, and another 2 barks. And wouldn't you know, in that whole big building, we didn't see another soul. Just a lot of closed doors. What's going on with that place? Well asked. It isn't a laundry house. It's what we used to call a hideout. The Shrike's perverse stronghold. Frankly, I'm glad I haven't seen inside it more often. But I know that's just because news doesn't usually make its way out through those walls. Like I said, not many exits. We found a man lying on the floor next to a chair with every drop of his blood relocated to the surrounding surfaces via a slice across the neck. His window, not one of the barred ones, was broken. Oh, so that's the killer's escape route, I assume. Ah, but we were 5 stories up, so the jump would probably finish off whoever attempted it. What do you think? Winthrop mulled it over. It probably wasn't a Shrike, he said. Why not? Gang members have arguments among themselves all the time. Yeah, but if that had been the case, they'd keep it completely quiet. Quite right. What else? Ah, he said, suddenly. You haven't said anything about recent gemfall. Good, that's always the first thing to think about. What's recently fallen? What particular opportunities did it give the criminal element? What would you be guessing? Well, I suppose you'd have mentioned it if it had been teleport season. I would. It wasn't. So, in that case, I'd be thinking about either attention deflection or actual invisibility, I suppose, since we don't know yet what level this guy's on. Or maybe binding magic? I suppose he could have hopped onto a breeze and blown in through the window and back out again. So I'd expect recent topaz or chrysolite, maybe opal? Funnily enough, it wasn't any of those. The most recent gemfall had been ordinary sapphire, a bit of opal, and some tanzanite. Tanzanite, crossing magic. Now, notice I've said it wasn't opal and then said it was opal, so I've put a note already. So it was opal. Think of something else. So it'll be a different gem when we get to it. Tanzanite, crossing magic. Someone could survive the 4-story fall if they skipped over half the distance. He could have landed on his feet just as harmlessly as if he'd jumped out of a ground floor window. Got it in 1. It'd be harder to get up, though. I haven't used crossing magic much, but in my experience, it has to be a distance that's only just out of your range. Something you could imagine getting across without it, if fate was in your favour. Exactly. He didn't get in through the window. In fact, we found out later, he actually just went up to the front door of the mill and knocked. Then when someone opened it, he simply rolled along the length of the door, through the hinged end, and was up the stairs in 2 quick strides before the man on the door turned round. Gosh! Yeah, I said something similar at the time. You don't pull off a move like that without a very well-made candle, burning somewhere, slipping through tiny cracks is next-level stuff. He must have paid a pretty penny for it, which makes this premeditated. Well, the owner of the building didn't have anything to say about who might have done it, but I was stopped on the stairs by a member of the Shrikes. He had a scarf to cover his face, of course, but Mrs. Edison's youngest has a voice you could identify from across town, who suggested a culprit. Apparently there was a chap by the name of Greville, who had a known rivalry with the deceased. So we made our inquiries. Turns out Greville had been at his local all night and had plenty of witnesses to back him up. A whole tavern full of witnesses, in fact. They were having a bit of a night. I believe the landlord was doing cheap pints for that evening only, so everyone had settled in for a long evening, and they all agreed Greville hadn't moved from his seat. Oh, were they all lying? Were they all taipans? No, all ordinary citizens, and I don't think they knew Greville was involved in that sort of thing. So, any ideas at this stage? Not if the witnesses were telling the truth. I didn't say that. I said they weren't lying. There's a subtle difference. You don't sit in a tavern for a whole night, working through pint after pint, and just not move from your seat. Oh! So what did we do? You checked the toilets for escape routes. Exactly. There was a little window, just a narrow one up near the ceiling. You'd have to really hoist yourself up to get up there. But of course this guy's crossing, so it's no trouble to him. He can be out, down the road to the mill and back before anyone thinks he's been a long time. So, you didn't set up a vision of the gents to keep... Sorry. So, you didn't set up a vision in the gents to catch him in the act. Isn't that a bit illegal? Well, usually you wouldn't, but Bodmin was convinced, so he ordered one called up and examined it himself. But no joy. Greville had thought of that. There was a false vision already in place of him in the stall. Bodmin had to look over the top of the door. He said it was quite provocatively graphic. Serves him right a bit. Yeah, well, don't say that to him. Of course, we tried the crime scene, and that was well covered over with a vision, and we had a look at the door of the mill as well, but that was covered too. In fact, we tried a couple of random places along the route between buildings, and it was pretty much end-to-end vision. Looks like he'd hired a mage who knew the area, although the vision of the murder scene was very sketchy, so that was based on the perpetrator's description alone. No great surprise there. So, what do you think we did? Well, Winthrop said, the visions covered a wide area, which means a lot of room for error. I'd be looking for aberrant objects in the visions that could be used to track down the mage. So the patterning on the tankards at the tavern would be a good place to start. Some of them will be deliberately modelled after the real ones, but I'm betting a vision mage committing a tavern to memory would end up getting a couple of the patterns mixed up, which would make the real tankards suddenly useful. Gather up 3 or 4 of those and throw a pointer potion over them and you'd have a direct trace on the mage you need. Correct, but too complicated. I didn't need to find the mage at all. Oh. Huh? Now let me just make a note for myself here. There's me talking about tankards. But did I say the vision covered the tavern or just the toilets? So I can edit it in so that it does go to the toilet, find the escape route. In training, they teach you all about which gems do what and what potions to mix for what. They try and teach you procedure, but all they bother telling you about is the workaday magical stuff. You need to learn to think between those lines. Put that aside and think. Here's what I did. I theorised that any premeditated crime always has flaws, because you can't plan for everything. Greville had done well choosing tonight for the murder because he knew that everyone in that tavern would be getting more and more drunk as the night went on, more so even than usual, and that as long as he joined in with enough drunken songs, he'd be able to rely on their testimony without having to worry about their being too aware of what was going on. But the one thing that he relied on was also his biggest risk. He was a well-known man. Everyone within a certain radius of that tavern knew him, or at least knew him enough for a nod in passing. If his whole plan hinged on the tavern alibi, that means he would have to think on his feet if there happened to be anyone between his tavern and the mill who might recognise him. I was betting someone might have seen him en route. So I went back to the route. It's pretty direct. Went down just one road, but there are a couple of alleyways along the way that someone could duck into if they wanted to avoid being seen by somebody coming down the main road. So Grum set up her equipment in those alleyways, and sure enough, Greville pops into view, somewhere within the duration of the false vision that has him in the toilet stall. He's whooshing past, taking the corner and crossing the length of the alley, 2 steps at most. Typical crossing. Then he pauses, standing against the wall, watching the main road, waiting for whoever he's spotted to walk by. Then he's away again. And of course, as soon as he rejoins the main road, he just vanishes into the vision. So you've got him in 2 places at once, said Winthrop. One that's a blatantly false alibi, and one that's adjacent to a long stretch of false vision intended to hide his presence and which happens to be the route directly to the murder scene. Exactly. Warrant for arrest. Once it was all cleared up and the visions dispelled, we found out he'd actually caused quite a commotion in the mill while he was there. He kept attracting attention and then just crossing out of the room before anyone could react. He made it up to the victim's room, cut his throat, stole as much money as he could find, enough to recoup the cost of a vision mage and that crossing candle, wherever it was burning, and then he put the window through, crossed down the drain pipe to the ground, and was away. But we got him. Winthrop shook his head and laughed. I don't know how to think like that, he said. I hope I can learn. So go on then, what about Mr. Headthorne? How could you tell from touching the talisman that he'd never seen it? Because, said Straw, it was heavy. Right? Oh, for goodness sake, Straw, Grum chimed in from the back-facing seat. You can keep stringing him along if you want, but you can at least whisper it to me. I have no idea what you're on about either, and you're making me want to know. Here is the detail that apparently neither of you spotted, said Straw. In the vision, the paperback books the statue was sitting on top of were straight-backed. But in real life, they were sagging under the weight of the talisman. Didn't you notice? Winthrop had to admit he hadn't. So we have a time frame. Any vision mage would make sure to make a vision that resembled the crime scene exactly. But if anything changed since they last saw it, well, that won't be reflected in the vision. In this case, the mage had looked in through Mr. Headthorne's window when the spell was still new, and the books hadn't sagged yet. If that happened to be about a week ago, just after Mr. Headthorne's disappearance, then we'd have a complete story. Headthorne becomes talisman, mage is quickly sent up the ladder to get a viewing of the scene, vision is placed, and, to be certain, I just needed to feel the weight of the talisman. Was it heavy enough to have bent those books over in the space of a week? Guess what? It was. That's how I knew my whole idea was right. That's, said Winthrop, struggling to find the word. Detective work? Said Straw. Really annoying, said Winthrop. Grum laughed and offered him a sugar lump. And we're done. There you go. There's the whole first case. There's going to be, basically, I've already written a few more. They're going to go on these different little, crimes. And, of course, gradually a story starts to emerge, overarching across the whole thing. And that's where we are. So, now there's lots more. I've read you the first few scenes. Just the next case alone is longer than that. So we might have to take that in two goes, and I'm not sure how that's going to work, whether you're going to remember the details between goes. If you want to, this video will be available on the Patreon if you want to look back over it and, to check that I did actually remember to sort of subtly mention that the books were straight and that they were squashed in the two different scenes, but I think I did. And, I'm sure there are other details of that case that I'm missing because I'm not a detective fiction writer. This is my first go at that. I'm certainly taking liberties to allow myself a certain amount of wiggle room. I don't, have to research police procedure, for example, because I can just make it up. But it has to be consistent and, the clues have to work. Now, in this first one, because it's essentially a teaching assignment, I was able to sort of hide some of the, I was able to have it that we don't know what's going on until Straw explains, which is, I don't think I'll do that every time. You're allowed to do that to a certain extent because it's a bit Sherlock Holmesy, but you have to put the clues in there. There is another one where I think the next one that I've written, they kind of put it together a bit more together. But there we are. That's all for tonight. So thank you for coming, or for watching this later, if that's what you did. I think I can go to bed now, which will be nice, because I'm up a bit too late. But I just wanted to get to the end of that story. You can see, it kind of needed to come together. So have a think about that. If there's anything you think I should do differently, let me know. Now, something I need to chase up is that when I described this to a friend, and I didn't describe it very robustly, but when I did describe it to him, he said his immediate response was that he thought I was ripping off. Well, not ripping off. No, he didn't say that. He said that he thought what I was talking about was similar to the premise of a quite famous film. A very famous film. but one which I did see but can't remember because I saw it at the cinema. So there is always the chance that the concept sort of lodged itself in a little out of the way swirl of brain matter and just kind of came back for this. So I guess I'll just watch that film and find out. But I think even if what I'm writing here is very similar to that concept, which I suspect it isn't because I really did make it up myself, and so it's full of all sorts of details. But those very details, I suspect, will anyway make it distinct enough that I can carry on with this concept without it being too cheeky. But I guess we'll see when I watch the film, which I've been avoiding doing because I wanted to really make sure I had everything, my version of it all set down before I got influenced. That, and I'm a little bit worried to find out that it was all a waste of time. But I'm 58,000 words into this book now. As I said before, I've been working on it for months, longer than I should have done for that amount of words, but you've seen already how sort of finicky I am about getting it right. This is first draft, and that's a weird way of putting it because every paragraph is sort of 20th draft, as it were. But I still know that once it's all done, I'll have to redo lots of it because it won't hang together in the proper way. So I ought to just write it way sloppier. No, quite exactly. There's no cherry batch, is there? But you tell me what you think about that. If you know what film I'm talking about, because you know there's a film where this exact whole setup is in it with vision mages and so on. Let me know. I'm having my tablet before I forget. There we go. Right. Well, hope you enjoyed that. Perhaps some of you have been, even if you weren't here actually live, perhaps some of you listened to this later as a sort of an audio book. In which case, I hope you enjoyed that, even though it had bits of commentary in the middle, as I did other stuff. I think that's all that we need today. So, you know where to get me if you want to comment on that or on anything else. I'm in all the usual places. I'll see you on the Discord. Thank you very much. Good night. And by the way, genuinely, if you're on the Patreon, you've been financing this, so you are part of the editorial team and can weigh in. I don't have to listen to you, but I probably will because I'll feel bad otherwise. So yes, if you think I've done anything really sloppily or really stupidly or what have you, try not to give me any ideas because then I can't use them, because then they'll be yours. But little nudges in the right direction are fine. I had some help coming up with the name Elagast. I think I did that live on a stream. I was writing the very first bit and the bit in the station. I was writing on a stream. God, that was ages ago now, and I want to do more of those. In fact, I've got a bit in mind that will be a particularly good bit to stream because the story kind of writes itself because I've already planned it out very, very, very well. The case. So I'll do that one on a stream. Trouble is, I'd do all of it on a stream like my friend Garrett does, but I prefer to work it in a cafe rather than at home. I'm bad at writing at home. Simple as. Or, well, when I say bad at writing, it's probably the same writing comes out. I just don't like it. Or rather, what it is it's very difficult to write a novel, and you have to find the ways to trick yourself because it's a hell of a lot of work, and there's no end in sight ever, and it just goes on and on and on forever. And so you have to find ways of fooling yourself into doing it, as it were. And mine is making an event of it, leaving the house, going to this place that I treat as my office, cup of tea in hand, laptop. Friendly staff who I sort of half know by now, and right, so bye then. Thank you for that. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's the sort of thing that when I've finished it, you'll go like, yeah, I would read that. That's the sort of thing that I would find interesting. purely because otherwise it will have been a waste of your time. But yeah, that's the hope, isn't it? That you're writing something somebody would be interested in. We shall see. Anyway, that's for another day. Thank you very much. Good night. See you all soon. And specifically, by the way, I'll see you on Tuesday night. Because on Tuesday night, I'm going to be streaming a game with Abby. Don't know what game. We'll find out close to the time. I think I do know what game. I think I'm going to... do you remember I did a stream where I was going to play the games that people got us for Christmas, and I got halfway through and the computer overheated and shut off? Well, there's another couple of games left for us to play from that. So we will. So we'll probably do that then. One of which Brent gave us. And that is Cuphead. So, which I haven't played yet. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. All right. Bye then. Good night.